For 3 years of marriage, my wife never said a single warm word to me. Eleanor Vance, the ice queen of the capital, the chairwoman that an entire boardroom of grown men flinched to look in the eye. I had already signed the divorce papers. I left them on the marble counter of our cold, echoing penthouse, and I waited for her to scribble her name without even reading them. The way she skimmed every worthless contract a lackey slid across her desk. I told myself I felt nothing. I told myself the ice had finally frozen me too. And then, by pure accident, I wandered into a tiny, half-forgotten temple on the crumbling edge of the city, and I saw her. On her knees, on the raw stone floor, in a $2,000 coat she was ruining without a second thought, lighting a single white candle with hands that trembled. And I heard her whisper the words that shattered my entire world into powder. "Please, let him live a long and happy life. My beloved husband, who will never know I am dying for his sake." I stood frozen behind a wooden pillar, and my heart stopped beating. Let me back up, because if I just tell you the ending, you will call me a liar. You will say no man is that blind. You would be right. I was that blind. My name is Julian Reed, or at least, that is the name I have worn like a cheap coat for the last 3 years. The name of a nobody, a house husband, a man the entire Ashford dynasty referred to, when they bothered to refer to me at all, as the leech, the gold digger, the stray dog Eleanor Vance dragged in out of pity. That was the story everyone believed, and I let them believe it, because I had my own reasons for hiding. But I am getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand exactly how cold my wife was, so you understand exactly how hard the truth hit me. 3 years ago, our marriage was arranged. 2 envelopes, 2 signatures, 1 loveless contract stamped by 2 families who had never once asked what either of us wanted. On our wedding night, Eleanor walked into the master bedroom in her white gown, looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, and said only 4 words. "Sleep in the guest room." Then she closed the door in my face. I stood in that hallway for a long time, holding a single rose I had bought with my own money, and I told myself, patience. Ice melts. If I love her enough, one day this glacier will thaw for me. God, I was a fool. A patient, devoted, well-meaning fool. For 3 years I played the perfect husband. She had the delicate stomach, so I woke at 5:30 every morning to simmer congee and stomach-nourishing soups, a different menu for every day of the week. She hated noise, so I learned to move through our own home like a ghost, to close doors without a sound, to breathe quietly at night in my exile in the guest room down the hall. She was a merciless perfectionist, so I kept 400 square meters of glass and steel spotless, not a fingerprint on a single surface. I gave up everything I once was to become the man behind her, the invisible hand that kept her life running while she conquered boardrooms and crushed rivals and became a legend. And what did I get in return? Okay, noted. Move. 3 years of one-word answers thrown over her shoulder as she vanished into her study to work until 3 in the morning. Too busy, too important, too cold to even glance at the man who ironed her blouses. The board of Ashford Group feared her. I watched it with my own eyes at the one gala she ever dragged me to. 50-year-old executives, men who owned islands, went pale when her heels clicked across the floor. She would tap one manicured nail on a mahogany table, and a room would fall so silent you could hear the ice settle in the crystal glasses. "I called you here for a meeting," she said once, in that voice like a blade sliding out of silk. "Not to admire me." Grown men swallowed their tongues. That was my wife, Eleanor Vance, the woman the financial papers called the coldest, sharpest, most untouchable capital titan of her generation. The woman who could not spare me a single warm word in 1,000 nights. So you can understand why, on the morning everything began to unravel, I had finally given up. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary. I am not a completely hopeless romantic, but I am a stubborn one, so one last time, I tried. I booked the most expensive French restaurant in the city, a corner table by the window, the whole works. I bought 99 red roses. I had a necklace custom-made 2 weeks in advance, a single teardrop diamond on a whisper of platinum, because she always wore black, and I thought, just once, I want to see something warm against her skin. I practiced what I would say for 3 days in the guest room mirror, like a nervous teenager. And I waited. From 7 in the evening. From 8. From 9. The couple at the next table finished their dessert and left, shooting me pitying glances. from 10. At last, at 10:40, the restaurant manager coughed politely to tell me they were closing, and I called her. And it was not even Eleanor who answered. It was her secretary. "Mr. Reed, I apologize. Chairwoman Ashford had a transnational board call run long. She asks that you not wait up." Formulaic. Rehearsed. The voice of a stranger relaying a message about a stranger. I looked down at the steak that had gone stone cold on the plate across from me, at the 2 glasses of wine no one had touched, at the little velvet box in my pocket, and I started to laugh. Quietly. Bitterly. I laughed at myself, at the perfect, patient, pathetic fool I had spent 3 years becoming. Enough. I was done being a doormat. I carried the 99 roses out to the trash can by the valet stand, and I dropped them in without hesitation. The necklace I tossed off the little stone bridge over the canal on the way to the car, and it sank without so much as a splash, the way everything I ever gave her had sunk. Then I drove home, sat down at the kitchen island under the cold, recessed lights, and I filled out the divorce agreement I had been carrying in my coat for a month. I signed my name at the bottom in clean, steady strokes. Julian Reed. I left it there on the counter, where she could not miss it. And I told myself, I felt nothing at all. She came home at 2 in the morning. I heard the private elevator hum, heard her heels cross the foyer, heard them stop at the kitchen island. Silence. A long, long silence. I lay in the guest room with my eyes open in the dark, and I waited to hear the sound of a pen. It never came. Instead, I heard her heels move away, slow, unsteady, and then the soft click of her bedroom door. In the morning, the divorce agreement was exactly where I had left it, unsigned. Not a single stroke of ink on the line. I told myself she simply hadn't cared enough to read it. That was the first clue. I was too numb to see it. The next morning, I did something I never did. I followed her. Not out of jealousy. I was long past jealousy. Out of a cold, tired need to end things cleanly. I wanted to catch her with her lawyer, or with whatever elegant man the gossip columns like to pair her with, so I would have the proof I needed to walk away without guilt. So I trailed her silver Bentley through the morning traffic at a careful distance, expecting it to slide into the Ashford Tower's private garage. It didn't. It turned away from the glittering financial district entirely. It drove out and out, past the ring road, past the last of the shining towers, into the grey forgotten edge of the city, where the buildings got low and old, and the roads went cracked. And it stopped outside a tiny weathered temple with a mossy roof and a single crooked tree in the courtyard. I parked around the corner, and I watched Eleanor Vance, the ice queen of the capital, the woman who terrified titans, get out of her car alone, with no driver, no assistant, no bodyguard, and walk into that little temple with her head bowed like an ordinary frightened girl. And every instinct I had left screamed at me that something was wrong. I followed her in. Inside it was dim and cool, and smelled of old incense. She hadn't heard me. She was already on her knees on the bare stone before a modest altar, and she had taken off her coat and folded it beside her, kneeling in nothing but her thin silk blouse on that cold, hard floor. This woman who could not bear a wrinkle in a bedsheet. This woman who demanded imported everything. She lit a single white candle. Her hands were shaking. And then she began to whisper. And because the temple was so silent, I heard every word. And every word was a nail driven straight through my chest. I know I don't come often. I know I only bring one candle. I don't have much time left to bargain with, so please, whatever price there is, let me pay it. Take my years. Take all of them. Just let him live a long and happy life. Her voice cracked. My beloved husband, Julian, who thinks I hate him, who will never ever know that I pushed him away on purpose, that I froze him out on purpose, that I am dying, and I could not bear to chain a living man to a dead woman's bed. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone. Let him hate me. Let him leave me and forget me, and find someone warm who will make him soup and never make him wait alone in a restaurant on his anniversary. Just let him live. That is the only prayer I have. That is the only thing I have ever wanted. The candle flame trembled, and so did the entire foundation of everything I thought I knew. Dying. The word did not compute. It bounced off the inside of my skull and refused to land. Eleanor Vance was 31 years old. She was made of iron and ambition and 10,000-year ice. She stood on stages and made billionaires sweat. She did not get sick. She did not die. She was the single most alive, most terrifyingly unstoppable force I had ever met in my life. And she was kneeling on a filthy temple floor, bargaining away her own years for a man she pretended to despise. For a man she pretended to despise. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the wooden pillar behind me so hard I felt a splinter bite into my palm, and I welcomed the pain. Because the pain was the only thing keeping me from making a sound. 3 years. 3 years of sleep in the guest room. 3 years of, okay, noted, move. 3 years of one-word answers and slammed doors and a wall of frost I had spent 1,000 nights failing to climb. And it was all of it, every single frozen syllable, a lie, a shield, a performance she was killing herself to sustain, because the great and terrible Eleanor Vance was not too cold to love me. She was too busy dying to let me love her back. I do not remember leaving the temple. I found myself sitting in my car around the corner with both hands locked on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, my whole body shaking. In the rearview mirror, a man I barely recognized stared back at me. Julian Reed, the leech, the doormat, the patient fool. But underneath that name, underneath 3 years of playing dead, something very old and very cold and very dangerous was beginning to wake up. Because here is the part of the story nobody in the capital knew. Here is the secret I had buried so deep even my own wife never suspected it. Julian Reed was not a nobody. Julian Reed did not exist at all before 3 years ago. The man wearing that name was born Julian Thorne, sole direct heir of the Thorne dynasty, an empire so vast and so quiet that the Ashfords, for all their towers and their board seats, were a rounding error on its balance sheet. Thorne Global did not sell products you could see. It moved capital that moved nations. It owned the pharmaceutical labs where the future of medicine was written before the world ever heard of it. And I, Julian Thorne, before I walked away from all of it and buried myself alive under a borrowed name, had been something else too. Something whispered about in the darkest corners of 2 continents. In the operating theaters, where the untouchable and the doomed were carried in the dead of night, they had a name for the surgeon whose hands could pull a man back from the far shore of death itself. They called him the Reaper's Hand. That was me. I had walked away from the scalpel and the empire and the whole blood-soaked crown of it, because I was tired, so tired, of being a weapon and a savior and a legend. And I wanted, just once, to be an ordinary man who made soup for a wife who loved him. So when the 2 families arranged this marriage, I saw a plain, quiet exit from my old life. And I took the name Reed, and I let the world believe I was nothing. And in 3 years of playing nothing, I had failed to notice that my wife was slowly, deliberately, dying right in front of me. My hands stopped shaking. Something settled in my chest, cold and clear and absolute. If Eleanor was sick, then I would find out how sick and why, and how she thought she could keep it from me. If she was dying, then she had made one catastrophic miscalculation, because she had chosen to die in the same house as the one man on earth whose hands could save her. And if, as every screaming instinct now told me, someone had noticed a great empire's queen growing weak and had begun circling her like vultures over a wounded lion, then those someones had made a mistake so much larger than they could possibly comprehend. They had started their little game while the leech slept. Well, the leech was awake now. I pulled out my phone, not the cheap house husband phone I used to order groceries and reply, "On my way," to a wife who never asked where I was. From the hidden compartment beneath the driver's seat, I took out a second phone, matte black, no logo, 1 contact, and I turned it on for the first time in 3 years. It booted with a single soft chime, and the voice I had not heard in a very long time answered before the first ring finished. "Sir?" Just that. 1 word, and in it a whole world snapping to attention. Jasper. My shadow. The man who had kept the Reaper's hand alive through wars the history books would never record. "Jasper," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, low and even, and stripped of all the softness I had worn for 3 years. "The sleeping man is awake. I need everything. Everything on my wife's health. Everything on her doctors. Everything on the Ashford board. And everything, every last scent and secret, on whoever has been circling her while she got weak. I looked at the little temple in my rearview mirror, at the thin thread of candle smoke rising from its door. Someone made my wife believe she has to die alone to protect me. I am going to find out who, and then I am going to introduce them to the man she married. There was a pause on the line. Then Jasper said, with something almost like joy, "It is good to have you back, sir." 24 hours, I said. Put it on my desk. Then I hung up, and I drove home to my cold penthouse, and I picked up the unsigned divorce agreement off the kitchen counter, and I looked at my own signature at the bottom for a long moment. Then I tore it in half, and in quarters, and I kept tearing until it was confetti in my palm, and I let it fall into the trash, and I said out loud to the empty apartment, to the ghost of the woman kneeling on a temple floor, to myself, "No, we are not getting divorced. You are not dying. And every single person who taught you to believe otherwise is going to wish they had never been born." Jasper did not need 24 hours. He needed 9. At 11 o'clock that night, while Eleanor worked behind her closed study door the way she always did, pretending the world could not touch her, a plain courier envelope slid under the front door of the penthouse. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single encrypted tablet. I carried it to the guest room that had been my cell for 3 years, sat on the narrow bed, and pressed my thumb to the screen, and the Thorn network unfolded in front of me like a black flower. And I began to read the truth my wife had been dying to hide. The medical file came first, and it took the breath out of me. Eleanor Vance had been diagnosed 14 months ago with a rare, aggressive cardiac condition. A slow, cruel deterioration of the heart muscle, tangled up with an autoimmune disorder that ran in the Ashford bloodline. The old money families had a private name for it, whispered behind closed doors like a family curse, because it had taken her grandmother, and it had taken her mother, both of them before they turned 35. The doctors called it terminal. They gave her, at the time of diagnosis, roughly 2 years. That had been 14 months ago, which meant, if the paperwork in my hands was to be believed, my wife had somewhere between 8 and 10 months left to live. 8 months. I read the number 3 times, and each time it hit like a fist. But I am the Reaper's hand, and I did not become that name by taking a death sentence at face value. I read on. I read the treatment history, the drug regimens, the lab panels, month after month of blood work, and slowly, as I read, the cold, clear part of my brain that had cut open 10,000 impossible cases came fully awake, and it began to whisper that something here did not add up. Because the condition, as savage as it was not untreatable. Not anymore. Thorn's own labs, my labs, the ones I had abandoned along with everything else, had spent the last decade developing an immunosuppressive compound, a genuine breakthrough that could halt this exact deterioration in its tracks, and, paired with a specifically and extraordinarily delicate cardiac procedure, could give a patient like Eleanor not 8 months, but 40 more years. The treatment existed. It was real. It was rare, and it was guarded, and it was ferociously expensive. And there were perhaps 3 surgeons alive who could perform the procedure without killing the patient on the table. And I was, without any false modesty, the best of them. My wife was dying of a disease I could cure with my own 2 hands. So why was she dying? I went back through the file, slower this time, hunting, the way I used to hunt for the one bad suture in a botched operation. And I found it. I found the wrongness. Her prognosis had been getting worse faster than the disease could account for. Her lab values were deteriorating on a curve that no textbook matched. She was on a treatment protocol, yes, prescribed and managed by her personal physician, a smooth, celebrated cardiologist named Dr. Alastair Finch, who had assured her, month after month, that he was doing everything that could be done, that the experimental therapies were unproven and dangerous, that her only option was to manage the decline with dignity and get her affairs in order. And Dr. Alastair Finch was lying. I could see it in the numbers. The medication she was actually taking, the pills and the amber bottles on her nightstand that I had dusted around 1,000 times without ever really seeing, were not slowing her disease. They were, at best, doing nothing. And the timing of her sharpest declines correlated, precisely, with the dates she had begun each new, adjusted protocol from Dr. Finch. Someone was not merely failing to save my wife. Someone was quietly, patiently, chemically, helping her die faster. And they were doing it through the one man she trusted with her life. My hand was very steady on the tablet. That is the thing people never understand about rage. Real rage, the deep kind. It does not shake you. It makes you still. It makes you very, very calm. I opened the next file. The next file was a photograph, and beneath it, a name I knew. Caroline Vance. Caroline was Eleanor's cousin, the daughter of Eleanor's late father's younger brother, and the vice-chairwoman of Ashford Group. I had met her perhaps a dozen times across 3 years, at the few functions Eleanor could not avoid dragging me to. At every time she had been sweetness itself. A bright, warm, laughing woman who touched my arm and called me, "Poor Julian," and looked at me with a pity so soft and so practiced, I had genuinely believed she was the only member of the family who did not despise me. She had once slipped me a glass of wine at a gala, where the rest of the Ashfords were pretending I did not exist, and murmured, "Don't mind them, Julian. Eleanor is just difficult. She's difficult with everyone." It isn't you. I had been pathetically grateful. Caroline Vance, it turned out, had been the one paying Dr. Alistair Finch. Jasper's people had traced it 3 layers deep, through a shell company registered offshore, through a cousin's account, through a charitable foundation that existed only on paper, and at the bottom of all of it was Caroline, funneling a small, steady river of money to the good doctor in exchange for a very simple service. Keep the Queen calm. Keep the Queen hopeless. Keep the Queen quietly deteriorating on schedule, so that in 8 to 10 months, the great Eleanor Vance would slip away in her sleep, tragic and untreatable, and the chair of Ashford Group would pass, cleanly and without suspicion, to her devoted, grieving cousin. Caroline was not circling my wife like a vulture. Vulture is too clean a word. She was standing over a woman she had known since childhood and slowly turning off the lights. And she was not working alone. The last file was thicker than the others, and it made the whole picture snap into focus like a lens turning. There were 3 more players in this, and Jasper had laid them out for me like pieces on a board. The first was Arthur Vance, Eleanor's uncle, the eldest of the family and the patriarch of the board, a heavy, imperious old man who had never forgiven the company for passing him over in favor of his brother's daughter. Arthur had spent years muttering that a woman was too soft, too emotional, too fragile to run a titan like Ashford Group, and now, it seemed, he had found a way to prove it. For the last several months, Arthur had been quietly gathering votes, whispering to the board that the chairwoman's health was failing, that she was missing meetings, that her judgment was slipping, that for the good of the company and its shareholders, it was time to invoke the succession clause and remove her from command before she embarrassed them all. He did not know she was dying. He only knew she was weakening, and he intended to feast on that weakness. Caroline, of course, had been feeding him just enough to keep him hungry. The second was a corporate raider named Adrian Shaw, a slick, handsome new money predator who had been buying up Ashford Group's debt and quietly accumulating shares for the better part of a year, waiting for the exact moment the company's leadership fractured so he could swoop in, force a buyout, gut the empire, and sell it for parts. Adrian Shaw and Caroline Vance had been seen dining together, privately, 4 times in the last 2 months. He was her exit strategy, or she was his. Either way, the plan was elegant and evil in its simplicity. Weaken the Queen, remove the Queen, sell the throne, and split the spoils while the widower Leach wept alone in a penthouse he would be evicted from within the week. And the third player was the one that truly told me how thoroughly, how patiently I had been played. The third player was Ruby. Ruby Hayes, no relation to my true family, a coincidence of a common name, was a junior manager in the Ashford Executive Office, a soft-spoken, doe-eyed young woman with a shy smile, and for the last 2 years she had been, as far as I understood it, the single kindest person in Eleanor's entire orbit. It was Ruby who used to text me, gently, sympathetically, whenever Eleanor worked late. "Mr. Reed, the chairwoman asked me to tell you not to wait up. She's so sorry." It was Ruby who, on my birthday last year, the birthday Eleanor forgot, had left a small, store-bought cake on my doorstep with a note, "Someone should remember. Happy birthday, Julian. It was Ruby who, over quiet coffees she arranged when Eleanor was traveling, had listened to me pour out 3 years of loneliness and had said, so gently, with those sad, understanding eyes, "You deserve so much better than this, Julian. She will never love you. Some people just can't. Maybe it's time to think about yourself." Ruby had been the one who first put the word divorce in my mouth. And Ruby, according to the last file in Jasper's dossier, was Caroline Vance's cousin on her mother's side. Planted in the executive office 3 years ago, the very season my marriage began, with one job: manage the husband. Keep the leech tame, keep the leech lonely, keep the leech believing his wife despised him, and when the time was right, when the queen was weak enough and the vote was close enough, gently, kindly, lovingly, guide the husband out the door so that when Eleanor died, there would be no grieving spouse to inherit, to investigate, to make trouble. Ruby's sad, understanding eyes had been a leash, and the small, store-bought birthday cake had been a treat handed to a good dog. I set the tablet down on the narrow guest room bed. Outside, down the hall, a thin line of light still glowed under Eleanor's study door. She was in there right now, this very minute, my dying wife, pushing pills that did nothing down her throat and signing documents that a woman she loved was using to bleed her out, freezing me out to protect me, kneeling in temples to trade away her own years, and never once, not for a single second in 3 years, letting me see the truth, because she loved me too much to let me watch her die. I have killed men. I will not pretend otherwise, in my old life, in the dark, for reasons I told myself were good. And I had thought, honestly, that I had left that capacity behind me forever when I put down the name Thorne and picked up the name Reed. But sitting on that narrow bed, with that tablet cooling in my hands, I felt it come back, quiet and enormous and absolute. And I understood that I was going to take everything, from every single person who had built their fortunes on the slow murder of the woman I loved. I was not going to do it fast. Fast would be a mercy, and I was fresh out of mercy. I was going to do it the way I used to do everything, with a scalpel, precisely, and I was going to make certain each of them saw exactly whose hand was holding the blade. But first, I had to save her life. Everything else, the ruin and the reckoning and the fire, all of it could wait. My wife had 8 months, and Dr. Alistair Finch's poison was stealing them 1 week at a time, and that stopped tonight. I stood up. I walked down the dark hall to the master bedroom, the room I had not been permitted to enter in 3 years, and I opened the door as quietly as I had learned to do everything, and I crossed to the nightstand where the amber bottles stood in their neat little row. I picked them up one by one and read the labels in the light of my phone, and my jaw tightened, because now that I knew what I was looking at, the wrongness of it was obvious, almost insulting, the kind of thing only a woman with no reason to distrust her own doctor would ever swallow without question. I put the bottles in my pocket. I would have Jasper's chemists confirm what I already knew by morning, and I would have the real medication, the true Thorne compound, synthesized and substituted into identical bottles before she ever noticed the difference. She would keep taking her pills. She simply would not know that, starting tonight, her pills had begun, for the first time in 14 months, to actually keep her alive. I turned to go, and that was when I heard her. She was not in the study after all. She was here, in the master bathroom, and through the door, muffled, came a sound that stopped me cold. Coughing. A deep, wet, racking, tearing cough, the kind that folds a body in half, going on, and underneath it, worse than the coughing, the small broken sounds of someone trying with everything they had left not to cry out, not to be heard, not to be a burden even to an empty room. I stood in the dark of the bedroom I was forbidden to enter, and I listened to my wife nearly cough herself apart 3 feet away behind a closed door. Alone. The way she had chosen to face all of it. Alone. And I pressed the back of my hand hard against my own mouth, so she would not hear the sound I could not stop from coming out of me. 3 years. She had been carrying this alone for 14 months and freezing me out for 3 years, and I had spent that whole time feeling sorry for myself over cold soup and one-word answers. Never again. Do you hear me, Eleanor? I thought it as hard as I have ever thought anything, standing there in the dark with your poison in my pocket. Never, ever again. You wanted to die alone to keep me safe. You have no idea what you married. You have no idea at all. And by the time you find out, it is going to be far, far too late for you to push me away. By 4 in the morning, the amber bottles were back on the nightstand, exactly as they had been, arranged to the same careless angle, and no living soul but me and Jasper knew that the white tablets inside them had been quietly replaced. To the eye, nothing. To the light of my phone, nothing. But inside those identical little pills now lived the thorn compound, the real one, the breakthrough my old labs had bled a decade to create. And with every dose my wife swallowed, while believing she was managing her own graceful death, she would instead, cell by cell, muscle fiber by muscle fiber, begin to heal. It would not cure her. Only my hands on an operating table could do that, and that reckoning was still months and a great deal of blood away. But it would stop the fall. It would buy her time. It would steal back the weeks Dr. Alistair Finch had been shaving off her life, and it would hand them to me. The first thing I did after that was the hardest thing, and it had nothing to do with revenge. I made her breakfast. I always made her breakfast. That was not new. What was new was the way I made it. For 3 years I had cooked out of stubbornness and habit and a slowly dying hope. That morning, I cooked the way I used to prescribe medicine, deliberately, precisely. Every ingredient chosen against the file I had read all night. A soft congee that would not tax a strained system. A specific balance of potassium and magnesium her failing heart was quietly starved for. Ginger for the nausea I now knew her medication caused. A tea that would ease the coughing without thinning her blood. Nothing she would ever notice. Nothing that looked like anything but a leech husband's pointless devotion. But every bowl I set on that cold marble island from that morning forward was, in truth, a doctor's order, disguised as a fool's love. She came out of the master bedroom at 7, dressed for war in charcoal and black, her face perfect, her armor flawless. And if you did not know what I now knew, you would never have seen the thing I could not stop seeing. The faint gray under the flawless foundation. The half-second she gripped the back of a chair before she trusted her legs to cross the room. The careful, shallow way she breathed, so shallow, so controlled, so that the coughing would not come. My magnificent, terrifying, dying wife. Walking into another day of ruling an empire that a woman she trusted was selling out from under her. And she would rather have died. She had literally chosen to rather die than let me see her lean on a chair.
"You're up early,"
she said, not looking at me, sliding onto the stool at the far end of the island. 3 words. A record. 4. Her at breakfast. For 3 years, I would have leapt at 3 words like a starving man at a crust of bread. That morning, I only said the congee in front of her, and the ginger tea beside it, and I said evenly, "Eat while it's hot. The tea first." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. The old Julian would have hovered, would have asked how she slept, would have offered up some soft, eager sentence hoping for a scrap of warmth. This Julian simply told her to drink her tea and turned back to the stove. And I felt, rather than saw, her eyes come up and rest on my back for a long, puzzled moment. Good, I thought. Look at me, Eleanor. You have never once actually looked at me. Start now. She drank the tea. She ate more of the congee than she had eaten of anything I had made her in months, and I understood why, even if she did not. Her body was starving for exactly what I had put in that bowl, and for the first time in over a year, something was giving it what it needed, and some deep animal part of her recognized it and reached for it. She finished, set down the spoon, and sat for a moment with her hands wrapped around the warm, empty cup, as if she had forgotten to let go. Then she caught herself doing it, set the cup down sharply, stood, straightened her jacket, and said in the flat, cold voice that had been my whole marriage, "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." "I know," I said. And then, because I could not help it, because some things are stronger than strategy, I added quietly, "Take care of yourself today." She stopped. Her back was to me, one hand on the strap of her bag, and she went very still, the way she had gone still in the temple. For a moment, I thought she would turn around. She did not. "I always do," she said, and her voice was not quite as steady as she wanted it to be. And then her heels were crossing the foyer, and the elevator was humming, and she was gone. And I stood alone in the enormous, cold kitchen with a dishcloth in my hands, and I let myself, for exactly 1 minute, feel all of it. Then I put it away. There was work to do. Here is a thing I have to tell you now, so the rest of this makes sense, and it is the part that I did not know that morning and would not fully understand for weeks. While I was learning who my wife truly was, my wife was, in her own frozen, silent way, drowning in me. Let me tell it to you the way I later pieced it together, from what she said and what she did, and what, at the very end, she finally confessed. Let me tell you what it was like inside the Ice Queen. Eleanor Vance had not always been ice. At 6 years old, she had watched this same disease take her mother over one long, terrible year, and she had learned the lesson that would run the rest of her life. Love is a debt that comes due in grief. The more they love you, the more it destroys them to lose you, and you will be lost, because the Ashford women are always lost, early and cruelly, their own hearts turning on them like traitors. Her grandmother, her mother. She had done the arithmetic before she was 10 years old, and she had promised herself she would never, ever, make anyone pay that price for the crime of loving her. So she built the ice, brick by brick, year by year, until she was the coldest woman in the capital, and no one would ever be foolish enough to hand her their heart to break. And then 2 families had forced a marriage on her, and a quiet, stubborn, ridiculous man named Julian Reed had walked into her life carrying a single rose. And she had looked at him and thought, with something close to panic, "Oh no, not him. Anyone but him." Because she could see it in his eyes on the very first night. The thing she had spent her whole life making sure she would never have to be responsible for. He was going to love her. This gentle fool was going to love her with his whole heart, patiently, endlessly, and if she let him, he was going to be standing at her deathbed in a year or 2, watching her heart betray her the way her mother's had, and it would break him, and she would be the one who did it. So she said, "Sleep in the guest room." And she said it every day in 100 cold little ways for 3 years. She froze him out. She gave him 1 word where he ached for 100. She let him believe she despised him, because a man who believes his wife despises him will grieve for a week when she dies, and then he will be free. And a man who knows his wife loves him will grieve for the rest of his life. She was not protecting herself. She had given up on herself the day the diagnosis came. She was protecting him, in the only brutal way she knew how, the way she had learned at 6 years old, kneeling by a hospital bed. And it was the loneliest thing a human being has ever done, and she did it every single day. And she made his soup, and threw away his roses, and told him not to wait up, and she went home to a temple on the edge of the city to beg a god she did not believe in to let him live and forget her. That was my wife. That was the woman I had spent 3 years pitying myself over. She did not know, that morning, why the congee tasted like it was made by someone who understood exactly what her body needed. She did not know why, for the first time in over a year, she made it through an entire 11-hour day of meetings without having to lock herself in her private washroom to cough into a towel. She did not know why, that night, she slept without waking, or why the crushing gray exhaustion that had become the texture of her whole existence had, just slightly, lifted. She only knew that something had changed, and that the change had started at a breakfast table, and that the ridiculous patient man she had spent 3 years pushing away had, for one moment, told her to take care of herself, in a voice that did not sound patient or ridiculous at all. It had sounded like a command. It had sounded like a man who had every intention of being obeyed. She lay in the dark that night and stared at the ceiling and thought, "He's supposed to be leaving. I left the divorce papers where he could sign them again. Why hasn't he signed them? Why does he keep making me breakfast?" And she was furious at the small, treacherous thing that flickered in her chest at the thought. Because she had 8 months, and hope was the one luxury a dying woman absolutely could not afford. She had no idea. She had no idea at all what I was, or what I had begun, or how completely I had already decided that she was not going to die. If she had known, she would have run. So I did not tell her. I let her think I was still Julian Reed, the leech, the doormat, softening a little at the end, a sad, devoted dog too dumb to leave. And behind that mask, I went to war. The first move was Ruby, because Ruby was the leash, and I wanted to feel the collar in my own hands before I did anything else. She texted me 2 days later, right on schedule, that soft, sad concern like clockwork. "Julian, are you okay? I heard things have been hard. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. You know I'm always here for you." 2 days after I had left divorce papers on the counter. Of course she knew. Caroline's whole plan was riding on getting me out the door, and the leash had felt me start to slip. And here she came to gently tug me back into place. 2 months ago, I would have met her at that quiet little coffee shop and poured out my heart and let her sad eyes tell me I deserved better. Now I read the message 3 times, and I felt nothing but a cold, clean anticipation, and I typed back, "You're right. I could use someone to talk to. Tomorrow?" And I watched the little bubble of her reply appear almost instantly, and I imagined her smiling as she reported up the chain that the dog was still on the leash, and I smiled too, at my dark reflection in the phone, because she was about to spend the next several weeks handing me, one careful lie at a time, everything I needed to bury the people she worked for. "You want to manage the husband, Ruby?" I thought. "By all means, come manage me. Let me show you exactly how manageable I am." The coffee shop Ruby always chose was small and quiet and tucked away 3 blocks from Ashford Tower, the kind of place where no one from the company would ever wander in, which had always struck me, in my innocence, as thoughtful. Now I understood it differently. She did not pick a private place to comfort me. She picked a private place to work me, where no one who might recognize the chairwoman's husband would see her slowly, sweetly, talking him into leaving. She was already there when I arrived, at the corner table, and she stood up with that soft, anxious smile and touched my arm, and her eyes did their sad, understanding thing. "Julian, God, you look tired. Sit. I already ordered your usual." My usual. She knew my usual. 2 years of these little coffees, and she knew my coffee order, and my birthday, and the exact shape of my loneliness. Because it had all been in her file, the way Eleanor's labs had been in mine. I sat. I let my shoulders sag the way the old Julians would have. I let my voice come out low and defeated. "I don't know, Ruby. I really don't know anymore." And she leaned in, and she went to work. And it was, I will admit, a genuinely masterful performance. She did not push. She never pushed. That was her whole art. She just listened, and she nodded. And every so often she laid down a single, soft sentence, exactly where it would do the most damage. "It isn't your fault, Julian. You gave her everything. Some people just aren't capable of loving anyone back, and it isn't a reflection on you. You know what I keep thinking? You're only 32. You have a whole life. Doesn't it deserve to be spent with someone who actually sees you?" Every line a tug on the leash, every sad glance a hand guiding me toward the door, and I sat there and I ate it up and I let my eyes go wet, and inside I catalogued every word. Because a person lying to you will always, if you let them talk long enough, tell you the exact shape of the truth by the shape of the hole they are trying to fill. Then I did the thing I had come to do. I baited the hook. "Can I tell you something?" I said, low, like a confession. "The other night I actually signed the papers, left them on the counter, and she didn't sign them. She didn't even read them." I let that sit. I watched Ruby's face, and there it was, a flicker, a fraction of a second of something that was not sympathy at all, something sharp and calculating and alarmed, before the soft mask came back down. The leash had felt slack, and now it had felt the dog stop walking, and she needed, urgently, to get me moving toward the door again. "Oh, Julian," she breathed. Of course she didn't read them. She doesn't respect you enough to even— Oh, that's awful. I'm so sorry." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "But listen to me. Listen. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe now you can stop waiting for her permission to be happy. You don't need her to sign anything for you to know it's over. You could just go. Start clean. I could help you. I know it's scary, but sometimes the bravest thing is just to walk out the door and not look back." There it was. Just go. Don't wait for the divorce. Don't make it official. Don't leave any legal trace or any grieving spouse. Just vanish, so that when the Queen dies in 8 months, there is nothing and no one to complicate the inheritance. It was so clean. It was so kind. It was the single most cold-blooded sentence anyone had said to me in 3 years. And it came wrapped in the warmest voice at the table. "You'd help me?" I said, and I let my voice crack with gratitude. And God help me, I hated how easy it was to give her what she wanted. "You're the only one who's ever, Ruby, you're the only person in this whole thing who's ever been on my side." Her eyes shone. She thought she had me. "Always," she said. "I promise. Whatever you need. When you're ready to leave, you come to me first, okay? Before anyone. Before her. Come to me." "Before anyone," I agreed. And I smiled at her, and she smiled back. And we understood each other perfectly, the two of us, both smiling, both lying, except that only one of us knew we were both doing it. I paid for the coffee, which the old Julian always did, and I walked out into the grey afternoon, and I took out my black phone and I said, "Jasper, she just told me to leave without filing and to come to her first when I do. Confirm the surveillance on her is clean. I want to know every person she calls in the next hour." Because I knew exactly what Ruby was doing right now, walking briskly back towards Ashford Tower with her heels clicking. She was reporting to Caroline that the husband was cracking, that he was close, that it was almost time to move to the next phase. And I wanted to hear the panic in the whole rotten machine when it began to realize, far too late, that the dog it had been so carefully walking had already slipped the leash and was standing directly behind it. That evening, I paid a visit to Dr. Alistair Finch. He kept a private clinic on the top floor of a glass tower in the medical district, the kind of practice where the very rich pay very much to be told, gently and expensively, whatever they most want or most fear to hear. He was working late, alone, his staff gone home, when I let myself into his office, and he looked up from his desk with the automatic irritation of an important man interrupted, and then the irritation slid off his face when he registered who was standing in his doorway. "Mr. Reed," he said, and I watched him recalibrate, the smooth professional warmth coming up like a shield. "I'm sorry, we're closed. Is everything all right? Is it the chairwoman?" A perfect note of concern. He was good. He had to be good, to have looked my dying wife in the eye once a month for over a year and told her there was nothing to be done. I closed the door behind me. I did not sit down. "Dr. Finch," I said, "I'm going to say some numbers to you, and I want you to watch your own face in that window behind me while I do it, because you're going to learn something about yourself." He frowned, the concern curdling toward alarm, and I began. I recited his offshore account. I recited the shell company. I recited the dates and the amounts of every payment Caroline Vance had funneled into his hands over 14 months, and I recited the corresponding dates on which he had adjusted my wife's protocol. And I watched, exactly as I had told him he would, all the blood leave his smooth, handsome face, watched him go the color of the paper on his desk, watched his mouth open and close with no sound coming out. And when I was done, when he was sitting frozen and grey, with his manicured hands flat on the desk, as if to keep himself from sliding out of the chair, I finally sat down across from him, and I leaned forward, and I let him see, for just a moment, the man who lived under the name Julian Reed. "You have been prescribing my wife a placebo regimen," I said quietly, while telling her there is no treatment for her condition. "There is a treatment. I know there is a treatment, because the compound that treats it was developed in a laboratory that I own, doctor, and I could recite its molecular structure to you from memory if we had the evening. You looked a dying woman in the eye every month for over a year, a woman who trusted you with her life, and you took money to help her die faster and stay hopeless while she did it. I let that sit in the silent office. I want you to understand something. In another life, in another version of this conversation, you would not be leaving this room. I want you to sit with how close you came to that, and how entirely it depends on the next 10 minutes. He broke. Of course he broke. Men like Alistair Finch are brave right up, until the exact instant they are not. He babbled. It was Caroline. It was all Caroline. She had come to him. She had threatened his reputation. She had offered so much money. He never thought it would go this far. He was a doctor. He had a family. Please, please. And I let him babble, because every word was going on to Jasper's recording. A full, clean confession. Names and dates and amounts. And when he had finished emptying himself out onto the desk between us, I told him precisely what he was going to do. You are going to keep going to your appointments with my wife, I said. You are going to keep telling her exactly what you have been telling her, that her condition is stable, that nothing more can be done, that she should rest. You will change nothing, you will warn no one, and above all, you will not so much as glance sideways at Caroline Vance, because from this moment forward, Dr. Finch, you work for me, and the only thing standing between you and a prison cell and the total incineration of your career and your name is your absolute, silent, flawless obedience. Do you understood? He understood. He understood so hard he nearly wept with it. And I stood up and buttoned my coat, and I paused at the door, and I said one more thing, because I wanted him to carry it home with him. For the record, I said, the compound you told her didn't exist. She's already taking it. She has been for 3 days. Her heart is already getting stronger, and neither she nor Caroline knows why. And that, Dr. Finch, is the only good work you have done for her in over a year. The fact that you have no idea it's happening. And I left him there, grey and shaking in his expensive, empty office, having just realized that the leech he had helped ruin owned the ground he was standing on. And I walked out into the night, one enemy lighter, and every enemy closer. 3 days. 3 days awake, and I had already turned her doctor into my instrument, and her confidant into my informant, and I had begun to heal her without her knowledge, and not one of them, not Ruby, not Finch, not Caroline, not Arthur, not Adrian Shaw, had the faintest idea that the ground under the whole elegant murder had shifted. They still thought they were playing chess against an empty chair. They had no idea the pieces had started moving on their own. But I want to be honest with you about something, because this is not only a story about revenge, and if I let it become only that, I will have lied to you about the most important part. That night I came home late, and the penthouse was dark, and I thought she was asleep, and I went to the kitchen to leave a covered bowl of the next morning's medicine soup in the refrigerator, and she was there, sitting alone at the island in the dark, in a robe, not working, not on the phone, just sitting, with a single glass of water in front of her that she had not touched. And when the light from the open refrigerator fell across her, I saw that she had been crying. Eleanor Vance. Crying, alone, in the dark, in the middle of the night. And the instant she saw me, she wiped it away so fast and so smoothly that a man who had not spent 3 days learning the truth would never have known it happened. You're back, she said. Cold, flat, perfect. It's late. Couldn't sleep, I lied. You either? I don't sleep much. She stood, and this time she was not fast enough to hide the way she steadied herself against the counter, and I had to physically stop myself from crossing the room to her, from taking her by the shoulders and saying, I know everything. You don't have to do this alone. Stop. Please. Let me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because if I told her now, before it was done, before she was safe, she would run. And she would find some way to finish what her body had started, just to keep me out of it. And I could not risk that. So I stood still, and I let her be cold. And it was the hardest thing I did in all of it. Harder than Finch, harder than anything that came after. I let my dying wife walk past me in the dark, alone, 3 feet away, when everything in me was screaming to hold her. Good night, Julian, she said at the door of the master bedroom, and there was something in it, some small crack, some exhaustion that had slipped past her guard. Good night, Ellie, I said. It was the first time in 3 years I had called her that. I saw her hand tighten on the doorframe. She did not turn around. And then she was gone, and the door clicked shut, and I stood alone in the dark kitchen with a bowl of medicine in my hands, and I made myself a promise for the second time in 3 days. Quieter than the first, but harder. I am going to make you well. And then, I am going to make you love being alive again. And then, only then, when you are strong and safe, and there is nothing left in the world that can be used against you, I am going to tell you who I am, and what I did, and why. And I am going to let you be as angry as you want, for as long as you want. For the rest of the long, long life I'm going to give you back. And if you still want to sleep in separate rooms after that, we will. But you are going to do it alive. The vultures made their first open move 9 days later, and they made it, as vultures do, at the exact moment they believed the queen was weakest. Ashford Group held a quarterly board meeting on the 40th floor of the tower, in a long glass room with a view of the whole capital, and I knew from Jasper the moment it was called that this was not going to be an ordinary meeting. Arthur Vance had spent months whispering, and he had finally gathered what he believed were enough votes, and he intended, that afternoon, to stand up in front of the full board and formally table a motion of no confidence in the chairwoman, citing her declining health and erratic attendance, and invoke the succession clause to strip Eleanor of her position and install his hand-picked interim leadership, which is to say Caroline, which is to say himself. He had timed it beautifully. Eleanor had been visibly weakening for months. He assumed she would arrive drawn and grey and short of breath, unable to command the room, and that the sight of her frailty would do half his work for him. He did not know she had been taking the real compound for 12 days. I did not attend the meeting. Of course I did not. I was Julian Reed, the leech, and the leech did not sit on the board and was not welcome within 100 feet of it. But I want to tell you about that meeting anyway, because I heard every word of it, through a channel I will come to, and because it was the day my wife found out, for the first time and without understanding it, that she was no longer standing alone. She walked into that glass room at 2 o'clock, in a suit the color of a gunmetal sky, and the board members who had been prepared to watch a dying woman shuffle to a chair, instead watched Eleanor Vance stride the length of the room with her spine straight and her chin level and her eyes clear, and take her seat at the head of the table as if she owned every soul in it. Which technically, she did. 12 days of a healing heart is not a cure, but it is the difference between a woman clinging to a chair and a woman who has forgotten she ever needed one. And the change was so stark, so unexpected, that Arthur Vance's careful timing began to unravel in the first 30 seconds. He tabled his motion anyway. He had come too far and told too many people to back down. He stood, heavy and grand, and he made his speech about the good of the company and the burden of leadership and the sad reality of the chairwoman's health. And he watched, with growing unease, as the sad reality of the chairwoman's health sat at the head of the table and looked at him with a small, cold, patient smile. And when he had finished, Eleanor let the silence stretch just long enough to be cruel. And then she said, "Are you quite done, Uncle?" And she took him apart. I have watched my wife work only a handful of times, and every time it frightened me a little, in the best way. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She simply began, in that quiet blade of a voice, to lay out the company's quarterly numbers, division by division, from memory, without a single note in front of her. And every number was a nail in the coffin of the idea that her judgment was slipping, because the numbers were extraordinary, and every one of them had her fingerprints on it. She named the 2 board members Arthur had privately courted, by name, and thanked them, sweetly, for their concern about her health, and offered to personally cover the cost of physicals for the entire board, since apparently the topic was of such pressing interest. She watched them go pale. Then she called the vote on Arthur's own motion herself, immediately, before he was ready, before Caroline could shore up the wavering, and the motion of no confidence in Eleanor Vance failed, badly, humiliatingly, in front of the entire board. And Arthur Vance sat down slowly in his chair, like a man who had just watched the ground he was standing on turn out to be a trapdoor. But that was not the part that mattered. That was just my wife being magnificent, which she did not need my help to be. The part that mattered came at the very end of the meeting, when the corporate secretary quietly circulated the updated shareholder register, and Eleanor, reviewing it out of habit, went very still. Because for the past year, everyone in that room had known, without ever saying it aloud, that Adrian Shaw was accumulating Ashford shares. It was the sword hanging over the whole company. If the leadership fractured and the stock wobbled, Ward would have enough to force a hostile takeover, and Caroline's entire plan depended on it. And Arthur's coup was meant to provide exactly the fracture Ward needed. Everyone had been watching Ward's stake climb, month by month, toward the threshold, like water rising toward the top of a dam. And in the last 9 days, Adrian Shaw's stake had stopped climbing. Worse than stopped. Every share he tried to quietly buy, some invisible counterparty bought first, at a premium, without hesitation, absorbing everything Ward reached for and locking it away where he could never touch it. His accumulation had not merely stalled. It had been walled off, completely, by an entity nobody at that table could identify, an anonymous holding structure that had appeared out of nowhere and begun, silently and with apparently bottomless pockets, to buy a protective wall of Ashford stock around the chairwoman's position. The dam was not overflowing. Someone had quietly built a second dam behind it, taller and stronger, and no one knew who. Eleanor stared at the register, and I would have given a great deal to see her face in that moment. Because Jasper told me later that she read that page for a full minute in total silence while the board waited. And then she looked up, and her cold, composed expression had, for just an instant, cracked into something almost like fear. Not fear of the vultures, fear of the unknown thing that had appeared behind her. Because a woman who has spent her whole life ensuring she stands alone so that no one can be hurt by her and no one can hold power over her, does not feel comforted when a nameless titan silently moves to protect her. She feels exposed. She feels seen. And Eleanor Vance had spent 31 years making very, very sure that no one would ever see her. "Who is buying?" she said to the room, quietly, and no one could tell her. And that, I am told, unsettled her more than Arthur's entire coup had. That anonymous titan was me, of course. Or rather, it was Thorn Global, moving a rounding error fraction of its capital through enough shells to be untraceable, walling off my wife's company from the raider who was circling it, building her a fortress she did not know she had.
I could have crushed Adrian Shaw outright in an afternoon. I chose not to. Yet. Crushing him would have ended the game too early and revealed too much. Walling him off did something better. It froze him in place, stake half-built and useless. Tens of millions committed and stranded, unable to advance and unwilling to retreat. And it left Caroline's whole plan hanging on a takeover that would now never come. And it did all of it silently, so that the vultures spent the following weeks turning on each other, hunting for the invisible hand, suspecting everyone but the leech who made the soup. That night, Eleanor came home earlier than she had in months. I was in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway a moment before she came in, and she was looking at me strangely, the way you look at a familiar room where one small thing has been moved, and you cannot yet say what. "Long day?" I said, setting a plate in front of her stool. "Grilled fish tonight, and a specific broth, and the small, careful medicine folded invisibly into all of it." "Someone is buying our stock," she said abruptly. She did not usually tell me anything about the company. She had never once, in 3 years, discussed her work at this table. She said it now almost against her will, watching my face, and I understood that she was, without any way of knowing why, reaching for me. "A lot of it. I don't know who. They walled off a hostile buyer we've been worried about for a year. Just closed the door on him, overnight." "Is that good or bad?" I asked, keeping my voice light, keeping my eyes on the fish. "I don't know," she said, and there was something raw under the cold, something almost bewildered. "People don't do things like that for nothing, Julian. Someone spent an enormous amount of money to protect this company, to protect me, and I can't find them, and I don't know what they want, and I don't." She stopped. She had said more to me in that one breath than she had said in the whole previous month, and she seemed to hear it. And she pulled back behind the ice, and she picked up her fork and said flatly, "It doesn't matter. Eat. It's getting cold. You made it. You should eat too. You made it. You should eat too." 6 words. And underneath them, an invitation so small and so terrified that a man who had not seen her kneeling in a temple would have missed it entirely. She was letting me sit down. For the first time in 3 years, my wife was asking me to eat at the same table at the same time. And she could not say it, so she said it about the fish. I sat down across from her. We ate in silence, but it was a different silence than the 3 years of silence that had come before, and both of us knew it, and neither of us said so. "Whoever they are," I said finally, quietly, not looking up from my plate. "Maybe they just think you worth protecting." She did not answer. But she did not get up and leave either, the way she always did the instant a meal was finished. She stayed. She sat at that table across from me long after both our plates were empty, both of us pretending to have somewhere else to look, and outside the enormous windows the Capitol burned with all its cold electric light. And somewhere out there, Arthur Vance was pouring himself a very large drink, and Caroline Vance was making urgent phone calls, trying to find out who had stolen her takeover. And Adrian Shaw was staring at a stranded fortune, and Dr. Alistair Finch was lying awake in terror. And none of them, not one, knew that the whole board had already tipped, because the piece they had all forgotten to count
was sitting at a kitchen table, telling a dying woman that maybe she was worth protecting, and meaning every word. Caroline came to the penthouse 4 days after the board meeting, and she came, as she always did, wearing kindness like perfume. "Julian," she said warmly when I opened the door, and she took both my hands in hers, and her eyes did the soft, pitying thing that had fooled me for 3 years.
I hope it's all right that I dropped by. I was so worried about you. After the meeting, everyone's been so tense, and I know how hard all of this must be on you, being kept on the outside of everything. She stepped past me into the foyer, glancing around, cataloguing, and I understood that she had not come to comfort the leech. She had come to look at me. Something had gone wrong with her perfect plan. An invisible buyer, a queen who suddenly looked well, a doctor who had gone twitchy and evasive. And Caroline Vance was a careful predator. And careful predators, when the pattern breaks, go back and re-examine every piece they had assumed was harmless. She had come to re-examine me. So I gave her the leech. I gave her the whole performance, the slumped shoulders, the tired, grateful eyes, the quiet self-pity. I made her tea, badly, fumbling with the pot the way an anxious man would. I let her draw me out about the divorce, and I told her, in a small, defeated voice, that I still hadn't decided, that Eleanor had seemed almost softer lately, that maybe there was still a chance.
And I watched Caroline's beautiful face arrange itself into sympathy, while underneath it, something cold flexed with displeasure. A softening marriage was the last thing she wanted. A husband who stayed was a husband who might still be standing there, with legal standing and an inconvenient grief when the Queen finally died.
"Oh, Julian," she said gently, setting down her tea. "I hate to be the one to say this, but you have to be careful with Hope. Eleanor she's not a well person. Emotionally, I mean. She uses people. She always has. If she's being warmer to you, I'd ask myself what she wants. I'd hate to see her pull you back in just to hurt you again." She reached out and touched my arm. "You deserve peace. You really do. Sometimes the kindest thing a person can do for themselves is to walk away before it's too late." It was the same song Ruby sang, in a richer voice. "Get the husband out the door." And I nodded, and I let my eyes go wet, and I said, "You've always been so good to me, Caroline. You and Ruby."
"You're the only two who ever were." And I watched her file that away with quiet satisfaction. The two of them, her instruments, both still in place, the husband still soft and still steerable. She left believing the leech was exactly as harmless as she had always assumed. She was, in a sense, the most dangerous person in the whole affair, colder and smarter than Arthur, more patient than Ward, and she walked out of my home entirely certain she had nothing to fear from me, and that certainty was the most useful weapon I owned. But she had noticed the Queen looking well, and that could not be allowed to make her curious about the medicine. The crisis came a week later, and it came at 3 in the morning, and it nearly undid everything. I want to be careful telling this part, because it is the part where the story stopped being a game of shadows and became, for one terrible hour, a matter of my wife's life in my literal hands. 12 days of the real compound, then a week more, had done what I hoped, halted her decline, given her back her strength, bought us time. But a heart that has been deteriorating for over a year, that has been actively sabotaged for most of that time, does not heal in a straight, clean line. It heals in fits, and it stumbles, and sometimes, as damaged tissue begins to remodel itself, it destabilizes before it strengthens. I had known this was a risk. I had watched for it. And at 3 in the morning, I woke in the guest room to a sound I had been half listening for in my sleep every night for 3 weeks. And I was out of bed and down the hall before I was fully awake. She had collapsed in the doorway of the master bathroom. She was on the floor, conscious but barely, grey and slick with cold sweat. One hand clawed against her chest, her breath coming in short, tearing gasps, her lips gone a colour that put a bolt of pure ice through me because I knew exactly what that colour meant. Her heart had thrown itself into a dangerous rhythm, the kind that can spiral into something you do not walk away from, and there was no time, none, to be Julian Reed. So I was the Reaper's hand. I was on my knees beside her in an instant, and my hands were on her, at her throat, at her wrist, and I was reading her the way I had read 10,000 bodies at the edge, and every cold, clear instinct I had buried for 3 years came roaring back all at once. I talked to her, low and steady and absolutely without fear. And my voice did the thing my voice used to do in operating rooms. The thing that made panicking people go quiet and dying people hold on. Ellie, look at me. You're going to be all right. I have you. Look at my eyes. Breathe with me. Slow. Out longer than in. That's it. Again. I got her positioned. I found the exact point below her sternum, and I applied a pressure that was not random. A specific vagal maneuver, precisely placed, precisely timed. The kind of thing no house husband on earth would know to do. And I did it with the certainty of a man who had done it under gunfire. And I watched her ragged, terrifying rhythm, and I felt, under my fingers, the exact moment her heart caught itself and stumbled back into a beat that would keep her alive. And through all of it, through the grey and the pain and the fear, Eleanor Vance was staring at me.
She was staring at me the way you stare at a stranger wearing your husband's face. Because the man kneeling over her on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. was not the soft, anxious fool who fumbled with a teapot. This man was calm in a way that had no bottom. This man's hands moved with a knowledge she could not begin to explain. This man had looked at her collapsing, dying, and had not panicked, had not screamed, had not called for help, had simply gone still and cold and certain, and reached into the crisis and pulled her back from it like it was something he had done 1,000 times. I felt her recognize it even in her half-conscious state, felt the confusion breaking through the fear, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I had shown her too much. "Whew," she whispered, when the worst had passed, and her color was crawling back, and she lay against me on the cold floor, with my arm around her shoulders holding her up. "Julian, what did you just—" Her eyes searched my face, and there was something in them I had never seen there before. Not coldness, not distance, but a kind of naked, frightened wonder. "You knew what to do."
You knew exactly what to do. For 1 second, 1 single second, I nearly told her everything. It was right there, all of it, crowded behind my teeth. I know you're dying. I know who's killing you. I'm the man who can save you. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 day of 3 years, and I am not going to let you go. It nearly came out of me right there on the bathroom floor, with her heartbeat steadying under my hand. I swallowed it. It was the hardest thing I have ever swallowed, because it was too soon. She was too weak, and the vultures were still circling. And if she knew now, before it was finished, she would either run to protect me, or worse, she would let herself believe in hope. And hope in a woman who is not yet truly safe is a knife that cuts the person holding it. So I lied. God forgive me. I looked into the first open, unguarded, frightened human expression my wife had shown me in 3 years, and I lied to it. "I did a lot of things before we met," I said quietly, helping her sit up against the wall. "Volunteered with an emergency response team years ago. First aid." "It stays in your hands." I brushed the damp hair off her forehead, a thing I'd never once been permitted to do. She did not pull away. "You're going to be okay. But you scared me half to death, Ellie. How long has your heart been doing this?" And there it is. Was. The moment of truth, hanging in the air between us on the cold floor. This was where, if she was ever going to tell me, she would tell me. I could see the war of it in her face, the exhaustion, the longing to just once set the weight down, the ancient reflex that had ruled her since she was 6 years old. Do not let anyone love you. Do not let anyone watch you go. I watched her choose. I watched the ice come back up over the crack, slower than usual, more reluctant than I'd ever seen it. But it came. "It was nothing," she said. "Low blood sugar. I didn't eat today." A lie so thin it was almost a cry for help. She looked away from me. "I'm fine now. You can go back to bed." "Ellie." I said, "I'm fine, Julian." And there was the flat, cold voice again. But it was shaking, just slightly, at the edges, and she would not look at me. And I understood that she was not pushing me away because she did not want me there. She was pushing me away because she wanted me there so badly that it terrified her, because the fool had just knelt on the floor and saved her life, and looked at her with an expression she had spent 3 years making sure she would never see. And if she let herself lean into that for even one moment, she was afraid she would never be able to stop.
And then he would be standing at her deathbed after all, and she would have done to him the one thing she had built her entire frozen life to prevent. So I did the only thing I could do. I did not argue. I got a blanket, and I put it around her shoulders, and I got her a glass of water and set it in her hand, and I sat down on the floor next to her, my back against the wall, not touching her, just there, and I did not leave.
And after a long time, a very long time, in the grey hour before dawn, I felt my wife's rigid shoulders slowly lose their fight, and her head tipped, and came to rest, at last, against my shoulder. And she fell asleep there, on the bathroom floor, leaning against the husband she had spent 3 years exiling. And I sat perfectly still, and did not breathe too loud, so as not to wake her, so as not to frighten her, so as not to break the single most fragile and precious thing that had happened to me in 3 years of marriage. I did not sleep. I sat there and held the weight of her against my shoulder, and I watched the light come up grey and then gold over the capital, and I made a cold decision in the dawn. I had shown her too much. The healing was working, but it was not safe. Her heart would keep stumbling as it mended, and I could not keep pretending to be a man who happened to know first aid. And more than that, Caroline had noticed the Queen looking well, and a curious Caroline was a mortal danger, because a curious Caroline might test the medicine, might replace it, might find some new way to close the trap. The time for pure shadows was ending. I could not stay Julian Reed the leech for much longer. Sooner than I'd wanted, I was going to have to start letting the world see the man underneath, and once that began, it could not be stopped. But not to her. Not yet. To the vultures first. I would let the enemies see the blade before I ever let my wife see the hand that held it. Because Eleanor Vance had built her whole life around the certainty that she had to face death alone, and I was going to take that certainty apart, brick by brick. But I was going to do it gently, from the inside, so that by the time she finally understood she was not alone, she would already, without ever deciding to, have stopped being alone weeks before. Down at Ashford Tower that same morning, Caroline Vance sat in her office and looked at the chairwoman's latest, inexplicably improved medical summary that Dr. Finch had been forced to file. And she frowned, and she picked up her phone, and she said to the man on the other end, "Something is wrong. She should be failing faster than this. I want you to run new tests. And I want to know why her husband still hasn't left." And so, without knowing it, without any idea of the size of the thing she was reaching toward, Caroline Vance began, at last, to pull on the one loose thread that was going to unravel her completely. Caroline ran her new tests, and the new tests told her something that turned her careful patience into fear. She had Dr. Finch draw fresh blood work under the pretext of a routine check, and she had it analysed by her own private lab, not Finch's, a lab that answered only to her. And when the results came back, she sat and stared at them for a long time. Because the numbers were impossible. Eleanor's cardiac markers, which for 14 months had marched steadily, reliably toward the grave, had reversed. Not stabilized, reversed. The disease was retreating. And there was, in the panel, the faint, unmistakable signature of a compound that had absolutely no business being in the chairwoman's blood, a compound Caroline did not recognize, that her own lab flagged as unidentified and highly advanced, something that read like it had come out of a research program a decade ahead of anything on the market. Someone was treating Eleanor. Someone was curing her. And whoever it was had access to medicine that, as far as Caroline's people could tell, did not exist. She did the obvious thing. She sent someone into the penthouse. It was clean and quick, and I almost missed it. And the fact that I almost missed it is the thing that still makes my blood run cold when I think of it. A cleaning service Eleanor had used for years, one of whose staff Caroline owned, was let in on a scheduled visit while Eleanor was at the tower, and I had stepped out, deliberately, because Jasper had told me the visit was coming, and I wanted to see what they would do. What they did was send one woman upstairs to the master bedroom with a small case, and in 90 seconds, she opened the amber bottles on the nightstand, removed the tablets inside, and replaced them with identical-looking pills of her own, and left. And no one who did not know would ever have seen it. Caroline could not identify the compound that was saving Eleanor, so she had done the only thing left to her. She had swapped the medicine back out. Except her new pills were not placebos. Jasper's people intercepted one within the hour,
And by evening, my chemists had it broken down, and I sat in a parked car reading the analysis, and I felt the cold thing in my chest go absolutely still. They were not doing nothing. They were killing her. Fast now. Whatever patience Caroline had lost, she had replaced with a compound designed to push a weakened heart quietly over the edge and make it look like the natural, expected, tragic progression of a terminal disease. The slow murder had become a fast one. The vultures had felt the ground shift. They had seen the queen inexplicably healing, and rather than investigate the miracle, they had simply decided to finish the job before the miracle could finish them. I got to the penthouse before Eleanor got home. I replaced Caroline's pills with the real compound again, and I did not sleep that night. And the next morning, for the first time, I broke a rule I had set for myself, because I could no longer afford it. I could not keep fighting a chemical war in the dark, swapping pills back and forth in the night, one intercepted courier away from my wife swallowing her own death. The shadows had kept me hidden. But hidden was a luxury I had just watched nearly cost Eleanor her life. It was time to make the enemy afraid to reach for the pills at all. It was time to show them the blade. I started with Adrian Shaw, because Adrian Shaw was the money. And when you want to make a pack of predators nervous, you kill the largest one first, in the open, where the others can watch. Ward had been frozen for weeks, his stake walled off, his takeover strangled by an invisible buyer. And he was, by all reports, apoplectic and increasingly desperate, pouring money into finding out who had blocked him. So I let him find out. Not who I was. The man did not deserve to know that. But who he was dealing with. On a Tuesday, Adrian Shaw's entire raiding operation came apart in a single trading day. The debt he had been so cleverly accumulating, Ashford's debt, the leverage he had planned to use to force the takeover, was quietly bought up overnight by that same anonymous titan and called, all of it at once. And Ward found himself margin called across 3 positions before lunch. His own leveraged empire suddenly exposed. His lenders suddenly nervous. A coordinated pressure applied to every soft joint of his overextended business by a hand that clearly knew precisely where every joint was. By the close of trading, Adrian Shaw was not circling Ashford Group anymore. Adrian Shaw was fighting for the survival of his own company, hemorrhaging, blindsided, ruined in the span of 6 hours by a force he could not see, could not name, and could not fight. And that evening, in the private dining room where he had met Caroline Vance 4 times to plan the carving up of my wife's empire, Adrian Shaw received a single item by courier, a plain white card. On it, one line, in my hand. Stay away from what is hers. No name. No threat beyond the words themselves. But a man who has just watched his life's work dismantled in an afternoon by an enemy with unlimited resources and perfect information does not need a name to understand that he has wandered, catastrophically, into the territory of something far larger than himself. Adrian Shaw was out of the game by morning. He liquidated his frozen Ashford stake at a loss, cut every tie, and fled. And he never came near my wife or her company again, and he spent the rest of his life not knowing who had done it to him. Which, I confess, gave me a certain satisfaction. The vultures felt it immediately. You cannot remove a piece that large from the board without the others knowing the board has an enemy on it. Caroline called an emergency meeting with Arthur, and Jasper fed me every word. And it was, I have to say, deeply satisfying to listen to. Arthur, blustering, frightened, demanding to know who had destroyed Ward. Caroline, cold and clipped, admitting for the first time that there was a player they had not accounted for. Someone with the reach to freeze Ward's takeover, then break him. Someone with access to experimental medicine that was healing Eleanor against all their efforts. Someone whose moves all pointed in one direction, toward the protection of the chairwoman. There is a third party, Caroline said, and I could hear the fear finally in her voice. The careful predator realizing the shape in the dark was bigger than she was. Someone is protecting Eleanor. Someone powerful, and I intend to find out who before they find out about us. Too late, Caroline. Years too late. But here is the thing about that period, the weeks of the widening war, that I most want you to understand, because it is the true heart of this story, and I will not let the fire and the ruin bury it. While all of that was happening in the shadows, in the light, at home, at our kitchen table, something else was happening. Something quieter and far more important. And it was happening because a woman had fallen asleep on my shoulder on a bathroom floor,
and had woken, for the first time in 3 years, without immediately rebuilding the whole wall. Eleanor began to thaw. It was not sudden. Nothing about her was ever sudden. It came in increments so small that anyone else would have missed them, and I caught every single one, and hoarded them like a miser. She started eating breakfast at the table while I cooked, instead of taking it standing up, ready to flee. She started saying more than one word. One morning she asked me, gruffly, almost accusingly, where I had learned to cook, and I told her a half-true thing about my mother, and she listened. Actually listened, and did not look away. One evening she came home and found me reading in the living room, a room she had ceded to me entirely for 3 years, and instead of retreating to her study, she sat down on the far end of the same couch with her own tablet, and we sat there in the lamplight, not touching, not speaking, at opposite ends of a couch, like two people learning a foreign language, one syllable at a time. And it was, I swear to you, one of the happiest evenings of my life. She was healing, in more ways than one. The compound was strengthening her heart, and something else, something I could not synthesize in any lab, was slowly, terrifyingly, unfreezing the rest of her. And she fought it. God, she fought it. I could see the war in her every single day. The 6-year-old at the hospital bed screaming at her not to let this happen, not to let this man matter, because the more he matters, the more it will destroy him when your heart finally does what Ashford hearts do. She would let herself lean toward me, and then catch herself and snap back. Warm 1 hour, and glacial the next. And I understood exactly why. And I never once punished her for it. Never withdrew. Never made her pay for the coldness the way a lesser man would have. I just stayed. Warm, steady, unmovable. There. Every time she pushed against something that did not move, and did not leave, and did not stop being gentle. And every time, it confused her a little more, because in her entire life, no one had ever refused to be pushed away. Everyone always left. That was the lesson. That was the whole architecture of her existence. And here was this fool who would not leave, who kept making her medicine soup, and calling her Ellie, and telling her she was worth protecting. And the architecture was starting, plank by plank, to come down. One night she said, out of nowhere, into the lamplit silence of the living room, not looking up from her tablet, in a very small voice that did not sound like the Ice Queen at all. Why are you still here, Julian? I set down my book. I looked at her, at the perfect cold profile that was not cold at all if you knew how to see it, at the woman who had knelt on a temple floor and traded her years for my happiness and had never once let me know. And I could have said 100 things. I chose the truest one I was allowed to say yet. Because you're still here, I said quietly. And I've decided I'm not going anywhere until you tell me, to my face, with your eyes on mine, that you actually want me gone. Not the papers, not a message through your secretary. You, your eyes, your voice. Until then, Ellie, I live here, and I make you breakfast, and I'm not going anywhere at all. She did not answer, but her hands had gone still on the tablet, and I saw in the lamplight that her eyes had filled, and she blinked it back with the fierce control of a woman who had trained herself for 25 years never to be seen crying. And she got up quickly and said good night in a voice that cracked right down the middle of the word, and she went to her room. And a moment later, through the wall, so faint I might have imagined it, I heard my invincible, terrifying, dying wife crying into a pillow, so I would not hear. And I sat alone in the lamplight, with my heart breaking and mending at the same time. And I thought, hold on, Ellie. Just hold on a little longer. I'm almost there. I'm almost to the part where I get to save you. Caroline, frightened now, did what frightened schemers always do. She pushed her pieces harder. And the piece she pushed hardest was Ruby, because Ruby's whole job was to get the husband out of the house. And the husband was not only failing to leave, he was, by every report reaching Caroline, growing closer to the Queen by the week. So Ruby was ordered to stop being patient. And a patient manipulator, forced to move fast, is a manipulator who makes mistakes. She called me, agitated, and asked to meet, not at the quiet coffee shop, but at her apartment, alone, in the evening. And I knew the shape of what was coming before I arrived. I went anyway, And I brought Jasper's ears with me, because I wanted it recorded. All of it. She opened the door in something soft and low-cut, the lights low, wine already poured, and the sad, understanding friend was gone, replaced by something more direct, because the gentle version had run out of time. She sat me down, she pressed a glass into my hand, and she began. And it was almost sad to watch, the desperation under the seduction. "Julian, I can't pretend anymore," she said, her eyes bright, her hand on my knee. "I've watched you suffer in that house for 2 years, and I can't stand it. She will never love you. She is using you. She's always used you, and you're wasting the best years of your life on a woman made of ice while someone right in front of you." Her hand slid higher. "I'm right here, Julian. I've always been right here. Leave her. Tonight. Don't go back. Don't pack. Don't tell her. Just stay here, with me, and never look back. Let me give you the warmth she never could." There it was. The whole plan. Naked at last. Get him out the door tonight. Before anyone. No papers, no trace, no grieving husband. 2 years of soft, sad friendship had all been walking toward this single moment. This apartment. This glass of wine. This trap, dressed as a rescue. And I looked at Ruby's bright, desperate eyes, and I felt, at last, absolutely nothing but the cold. I set the wine glass down, untouched, on her coffee table, and I removed her hand from my leg, gently, and I said, "Ruby, how much is Caroline paying you?" The bright warmth on her face froze, cracked, and fell away like a mask coming off. And for one instant, before she could stop it, I saw the real Ruby underneath. The sharp, cold, calculating thing that had been managing me for 2 years. And the shock of being seen was total. "What?" she said. "What are you talking about? I don't." "Ruby Hayes," I said. "No relation to me, though it is a funny coincidence, isn't it? Placed in the Ashford executive office 3 years ago, the exact season my marriage started. Caroline Vance's cousin, on your mother's side. Your entire job, from the day I moved into that penthouse, was to keep the husband lonely, keep the husband hopeless, and when the time came, get the husband out the door before Eleanor died, so there would be no spouse to inherit and no spouse to make trouble." I watched the color drain out of her face exactly as it had drained out of Dr. Finch's. The birthday cake was a nice touch. Genuinely. The little store-bought cake on the doorstep with the note. "You handed a lonely man a treat, and he was so grateful he never once wondered why the kind co-worker knew his birthday when his own wife didn't." That was good work, Ruby. 2 years of good work. And it's all recorded. Every coffee, every sad understanding sentence, and everything you just said in this apartment 30 seconds ago about getting me out the door tonight before anyone, which, in the light of your employer's most recent activities, I could make sound very much like something a great deal worse than manipulation. She was on her feet now, backed against her own wall, and the seductress and the sad friend were both gone, and what was left was just a frightened young woman who had bet her life on the wrong horse. "You can't prove," she started, and then stopped, because she could see in my face that I could prove all of it, and more. "What do you want?" she whispered. "The same thing I wanted from your doctor friend," I said, standing, buttoning my coat. "Your absolute obedience and your silence. You are going to keep reporting to Caroline exactly what she expects to hear, that the husband is wavering, that you're working on him, that it's almost time. You are going to warn no one. And when the moment comes, and it is coming very soon now, you are going to stand where I tell you to stand and say what I tell you to say. And in exchange, I will not hand a recording of your last 2 years to a prosecutor. Do you understand the arrangement?" She understood. They always understood. And I walked out of her apartment, leaving the wine untouched and the trap sprung backward. And I had, without her employers having the faintest idea, turned the second of Caroline's 2 instruments. The doctor was mine. The confidant was mine. Caroline Vance was now surrounded by her own weapons. Every one of them pointed quietly at her. And she was still, at that moment, sitting in her office, believing she was closing in on an unknown enemy, when in truth, the unknown enemy had already taken everything she had and left it in place, loaded, waiting. Arthur was next, and Arthur I did in the open, because Arthur was vain, and vanity should be punished in front of an audience. Arthur Vance, humiliated at the board meeting, had not given up. He had merely changed tactics, and had begun trying to damage Eleanor from the outside, feeding quiet poison to Ashford Group's largest institutional investors and lenders, whispering that the chairwoman was unwell, unstable, that the company was one bad quarter from crisis, trying to spook the money into demanding her removal. It was slower than a coup, but it was insidious, and it was the kind of thing that, left alone, could genuinely wound the company Eleanor had bled to build. So I ended it, at the annual Ashford Investor Gala, in front of 400 of the most important people in the capital's financial world. I did not appear myself. I was still Julian Reed, and Julian Reed did not attend such things. But the anonymous titan who had walled off Adrian Shaw made himself felt again that night, in a way no one could ignore. Halfway through the gala, as Arthur worked the room with his whispers, word began to ripple through the crowd that the mystery entity holding a fortress of Ashford stock, the same one that had crushed Ward, had that afternoon filed to increase its position and had issued, through counsel, a single public statement, one sentence that landed like a thunderclap in that room full of people who spoke money as a native language. We have full confidence in the leadership of Chairwoman Eleanor Vance, and we consider any attempt to destabilize it to be an attack on our investment, which we will defend by every means available. You have to understand what that meant, in that room, to those people. It meant that a titan with bottomless pockets, one powerful enough to break Adrian Shaw in an afternoon, had just publicly planted its flag behind Eleanor and dared anyone to move against her. Every whisper Arthur had spent weeks planting died in a single evening. The institutional money, which had been nervously listening to the uncle, turned on its heel and lined up behind the chairwoman so fast it was almost comical. And Arthur Vance, who had spent the evening quietly telling everyone the Queen was finished, found himself standing alone in the middle of a gala where every important person in the room now knew that betting against Eleanor meant betting against a force that had just destroyed a man far greater than Arthur Vance would ever be. He left early. He left, Jasper told me, grey and shaking. And he did not stop shaking, because a vain man's worst nightmare is not defeat. It is being made small in front of everyone he wanted to impress. And Arthur had just been made very, very small by an enemy he could not even see. That night, at home, Eleanor told me about it. She actually told me. She came home from the gala and sat down at the kitchen island where I was waiting with tea. And she was quiet for a while. And then she said, "The mystery buyers spoke tonight, publicly. They said they'd defend my leadership by any means, in front of everyone. My uncle's been trying to undermine me for weeks, and they just ended it." In one sentence. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, that gesture she did when she was trying to hold on to something. "I still don't know who they are, Julian. Someone out there is fighting a war for me, and I have never met them, and I don't know what they want, and it frightens me." She looked up at me, and there was that rawness again, breaking through the cold. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone spend a fortune, take on that kind of enemy, for a woman they've never met? People don't do that. There's no reason to do that. And I looked at my wife, at her bewilderment, at her genuine inability to comprehend that anyone would fight for her without wanting something, because she had spent her whole life certain that she was only worth what she could do for people, never worth anything simply for existing. And my heart broke for her all over again. "Maybe," I said, very gently, choosing every word, "they're not doing it because of what you can do for them. Maybe they're doing it because they can't stand the thought of a world without you in it." Her breath caught. "Some people are like that, Ellie. Some people would burn everything they own down to the last brick just to buy one more day of you being alive in the world. Whether you can do anything for them or not, whether you're cold to them or not, whether you ever love them back or not. It's not about being paid back. It's just that you being alive is the only payment they want." She stared at me across the kitchen island for a very long time, and something moved behind her eyes. Some enormous, slow, tectonic thing. Some suspicion just beginning, far too faint yet to become a thought. And she opened her mouth and closed it. And finally she whispered, "Who are you, Julian Reed?" "I'm your husband," I said, "the one who makes you breakfast." And I smiled at her, and I got up and rinsed the teacups. And I did not tell her, not that night, that the war being fought for her across the whole financial world and the man rinsing her teacup in her kitchen were the same person, because the moment was not yet mine to give her. But she went to bed that night with a suspicion planted,
a tiny, impossible seed, and I knew that soon, very soon, it was going to grow into the truth, and I was going to have to be ready for what she did when it did.
There is a stretch of those weeks I have to tell you about on its own, because it was the quietest part of the whole war, and the part that changed the most. And it happened entirely at a kitchen table and in a lamplit living room while the fire raged out in the world. Eleanor, without telling me, had begun to investigate the mystery buyer herself. Of course she had. She was the sharpest mind in the capital, and a titan had appeared out of nowhere to fight a war on her behalf. And she was not a woman who could leave a thing like that alone. She put her own people on it, quietly, and I knew because Jasper knew, because I had eyes inside every investigation aimed at me. And I watched, with a strange, fond dread, as my wife's people circled slowly closer to a truth she was not ready for. She was good. Her investigators traced the anonymous holding structure through 2 of its shells before they hit the thorn firewall and stopped cold. And I could have shut her inquiry down with a word, buried it, misdirected it. I chose not to. I let her keep looking, because some part of me, I think, wanted her to find me. Wanted the ice to crack from her side too. Wanted her to be the one who reached, for once, instead of always being the one who froze. She came home one night with a strange look on her face, and she sat down across from me at the island where I was plating dinner. And she watched me for a long moment. And then she said, apropos of nothing, "Do you know anything about the Thorn family, Julian?" I did not miss a beat. 3 years of hiding teaches your face to do what you tell it. The name, that's about it, I said, setting the plate in front of her. Everyone knows the name. Why? No reason. She picked up her fork, and she was still watching me. And I understood that she had followed the trail to the edge of the thorn firewall, and that some instinct, some deep, unreasoning intuition, had turned her from the firewall back towards her own kitchen, toward the quiet man who made her soup, and that she could not yet say why. The buyer, she said slowly. The one protecting the company. My people can't identify them. They're too careful, too good. Whoever it is has resources I can't even find the bottom of, and they're using them to protect a woman they've supposedly never met. And every time I try to picture what kind of person does that, She stopped. She looked down at her plate. I keep picturing the wrong thing. It's stupid. What do you keep picturing? I asked, very gently. She was quiet a long time. Someone who already loves me, she said, almost inaudibly. And then she seemed to hear herself, and she flushed, and she said sharply, which is absurd, because no one loves me. I've made very sure of that. That's the one thing I've been genuinely successful at in my personal life. And she stabbed her fork into the fish with a violence that was really aimed at herself, and I had to look down at the stove so she would not see my face, because it was the closest she had come, and she did not even know she had come close, and it was breaking my heart in the best possible way. That was the night she cooked for me, or tried to. I had made dinner, as always, but afterward, while I was washing up, she did not retreat to her study the way she used to. She hovered. She lingered in the kitchen, watching me, and finally, awkwardly, in the tone of a queen issuing a decree she was not entirely sure she had the authority for, she said, "Show me how to make the congee. The morning one. The one you make." I turned around. "You want to learn to make congee? Don't make it a thing," she said, immediately defensive, arms crossing. You make it every morning. I've eaten it every morning for 3 years, and I've never once. I don't know how to make anything, Julian. I can run a company that employs 40,000 people, and I don't know how to make a single thing a person could eat. It seems like something I should. In case. She stopped. In case you're not here, she did not say. In case I'm not here, she did not say. In case. The word my whole marriage was suddenly built on. So I taught her to make congee, at 10 o'clock at night, the two of us in the enormous cold kitchen. And she was terrible at it. Genuinely, remarkably terrible, this brilliant woman. She could not judge the water. She scorched the bottom. She asked me questions and then argued with the answers. And at one point, she got a grain of rice stuck to her cheek and did not notice, and I reached over without thinking and brushed it away with my thumb. And she went very still, the way she always did when I touched her. But she did not pull back. And we stood there in the steam and the lamplight, 3 inches apart, with my thumb still against her cheek. and something passed between us that neither of us had words for. And then the pot boiled over, and we both jumped, and the moment broke, and she laughed. Actually laughed. A real one, startled out of her. The first time I had ever heard my wife laugh in 3 years. And it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. And I thought, I will burn the entire world to the ground to keep that sound in it. The congee was inedible. We ate it anyway, both of us, at the island, at 11 at night, spooning down scorched rice paste and pretending it was fine. And she watched me eat every bite of the terrible thing she had made. And something in her face was so soft and so uncertain and so unbearably hopeful that I had to keep eating just to have a reason not to say all the things I was not yet allowed to say. Meanwhile, out in the world, Caroline's paranoia was curdling into something dangerous, and I want to set the two things side by side, the kitchen and the war, because that was the whole texture of that time. The tenderness and the threat braided together so tight I could not tell one from the other. Caroline had lost Ward, lost her coup at the gala, and could not find the third party. And she had begun, at last, to look very hard at the one variable she had always dismissed: the husband. She could not connect me to Thorn, the firewall held, but she was a careful predator, and careful predators eventually examine the thing they have been stepping over. And she had started asking questions about Julian Reed, about where he came from, about why a nobody with no history had married Eleanor Vance 3 years ago. And Jasper brought me the report of it, and I understood that the clock had begun, quietly, to run out. My cover was not going to hold forever. Caroline was going to keep pulling, and eventually, if I let her, she was going to pull hard enough to unravel Julian Reed entirely. And I could not let her do it on her terms, in the shadows, where she could act on what she found before I was ready. Which meant I was going to have to choose the moment to shed the disguise myself, soon, and choose it somewhere public, somewhere the reveal would do maximum damage to her and maximum protection to Eleanor, somewhere I controlled. I did not know yet that Caroline would hand me that exact stage herself with her charity gala trap, but I could feel it coming, the whole thing coming to a head, the war and the marriage converging on the same point, and I stood at my kitchen sink night after night, washing bowls of terrible congee my wife had made me, and I felt the two halves of my life, the tenderness and the coming violence, drawing toward each other like two hands about to close. And I was not afraid, because for the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. Not revenge. Revenge was just the ground I had to clear. I was fighting for the sound of a woman laughing over a boiled-over pot at 10 o'clock at night. I was fighting for a grain of rice on a cheek and a thumb that was finally, after 3 years, allowed to brush it away. I was fighting for 100 ruined breakfasts and 40 years of mornings. And against that, Caroline Vance and her whole rotten machine did not stand a chance. Because she was fighting for money, and I was fighting for the only thing in the world worth fighting for. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a person who loses and a person who cannot possibly, will not possibly, be allowed to lose. That is the thing no vulture ever understands, right up until the talons close on them. They think they are the predators. They think, because they are willing to be cruel, that they are the dangerous ones. But there is nothing on earth more dangerous than a gentle man who has finally been given something he is willing to stop being gentle to protect. I had been that gentle man for 3 years, soup and silence and a slammed door, and every one of them had mistaken the gentleness for weakness. They were about to learn, all of them, one after another, exactly what the gentleness had been hiding, and they were going to learn it far, far too late to do anything but fall. Caroline could not find the third party. She had hunted for weeks and turned up nothing, because Thorn does not leave tracks, and the not knowing was eating her alive. So she fell back on the one variable she thought she understood and could still control: the husband. In Caroline's mind, the mysterious protector and the softening marriage had to be connected somehow, and the simplest way to cut every thread at once was to do what Ruby had failed to do gently: destroy the husband. Make Eleanor throw him out with her own hands, publicly, irreversibly, and in the chaos of that, find out what he knew. Caroline decided to burn the leech down in front of the entire capital. The occasion she chose was the Ashford Foundation's annual charity gala, the largest social event the family hosted all year. 400 of the most important people in the city. Cameras, press, the works. Eleanor was required to attend as its host, and this year, for reasons she did not fully examine, she asked me to come with her. She had never once asked me to accompany her to anything in 3 years. She asked in her flat, cold way, not looking at me. "There's a gala Saturday. You should come." And I understood what it cost her to say even that, and I said yes. And I did not tell her that I already knew about the gala, and that I already knew, because Jasper had intercepted the plans, exactly what Caroline intended to do there. Caroline's plan was a classic, and if it had been aimed at any other man in that room, it might even have worked. She had arranged for a beautiful young woman, an actress, to be planted at the gala, primed to approach me in front of the cameras in the crowd, weeping, and to accuse me publicly of being her secret lover, of stringing her along for 2 years, of being a gold-digging fraud who married the great Eleanor Vance for her money while keeping a mistress on the side. She had prepared fabricated photographs, doctored messages, a whole tidy little package of evidence, all of it to be sprung at the height of the evening in front of 400 witnesses and the press. And the point of it, the real point, was Eleanor. Caroline was betting that the Ice Queen, humiliated in public by her leech husband's supposed betrayal, would do what her pride demanded and cast me out on the spot, coldly, finally, in front of everyone, and that the marriage and whatever it was hiding would be over in a single night. I let it happen. I want you to understand that. I knew every beat of it in advance, and I let it unfold, because I had decided that Caroline's own trap was going to be the stage on which the man under the name Julian Reed finally stepped into the light, and I could not have designed a better one myself. The gala was everything such things are: gold light and cold champagne, and 400 people wearing fortunes and smiles. Eleanor was luminous and terrifying in black, healthier than the capital had seen her in over a year, and I watched people notice it, watched the whispers. "The Queen looks well. The Queen looks strong. When did that happen?" I stayed a step behind her, the way a good leech husband should, and I waited. And at the peak of the evening, just after Eleanor had given her host's remarks from the small stage, right on schedule, the young actress made her move. She came out of the crowd weeping, beautifully, and she flung herself into the open space before the stage where everyone could see, and she pointed at me, and she cried out the whole rehearsed script, the secret affair, the 2 years, the lies, the gold-digging fraud who had a mistress while married to Eleanor Vance, and she held up her phone with the doctored photos, and 400 of the most important people in the capital turned as one to stare, and the press cameras came up, and a delighted, scandalized silence fell over the entire room. And in the crowd, near the front, I saw Caroline Vance arrange her face into perfect shock and horror, and I saw, beside her, Ruby doing the same, both of them poised to watch the leech burn. I said nothing. I did not defend myself. I simply stood there, calm, and I turned my head, slowly, and I looked at my wife. And Eleanor Vance, standing on that little stage above the whole scene, looked back at me, and I watched her decide. I need to tell you what was in her face, because it was the moment 3 years turned, and I will remember it until I die. She was the Ice Queen. The correct move, the move everyone in that room expected, the move her entire frozen life had trained her to make, was to cut me loose, coldly and publicly, to protect herself and the family name, to let the leech drown. Caroline was counting on it. The whole trap was built on the certainty that Eleanor's pride would not let her be publicly humiliated by a husband's betrayal, that she would sever me without a second's hesitation, the way she severed every liability. And for 1 second, I saw the old reflex rise in her, the instinct to go cold, to protect herself by cutting the cord. And then I watched her look at me, really look at me, the man who made her breakfast, the man who had knelt on the bathroom floor and pulled her back from death, the man who told her she was worth protecting, the man who would not be pushed away. And I watched the reflex die, and something else rise in its place, something that had been frozen for 25 years and had, in the last 2 months, begun to thaw. Eleanor walked down off the stage. In the ringing silence, in front of 400 people and every camera in the room, the Ice Queen of the capital crossed the floor and came and stood beside me, at my shoulder, and she took my arm, deliberately, publicly, claiming me, and she turned to the weeping actress with a face like winter, and she said, in that quiet blade of a voice that made the whole room lean in, "You've made a mistake, girl. This man has spent 3 years in my home. I know exactly where he is every hour of every day, because he's the only person in my entire life who has never once wanted anything from me. Her hand tightened on my arm. So whoever paid you, and I already know whoever paid you, wasted their money. My husband is not a fraud. My husband is the single most loyal person I have ever known. And anyone in this room who chooses to believe a paid actress over the word of Eleanor Vance is welcome to say so to my face, right now. Nobody said so. The silence held, and then it broke the other way entirely. The whole room recalibrating in an instant, the way rooms full of powerful people do, and the scandal collapsed, and the actress fled. And it was Caroline, standing frozen near the front with her mask of shock still on her face, who now looked exposed, because everyone in that room was smart enough to wonder who had staged such a thing, and the answer was going to occur to a great many of them very soon. Caroline's trap had not destroyed the leech. It had done the one thing Caroline could not afford. It had made the Ice Queen defend him, publicly, fiercely, and in doing so, declare to the entire capital that Eleanor Vance had, against all reason and all history, come to love her husband. But that is not the part of that night I carry with me. The part I carry happened afterward, in the car, in the dark, on the way home, when the two of us were finally alone and the adrenaline of the gala drained away and left something rawer behind. Eleanor sat very still beside me in the back of the car, looking out the window, and for a long time neither of us spoke. And then, without turning, in a voice I had never heard her use, small and cracked, and stripped of every layer of ice, she said, "I know someone paid that girl. I know it was Caroline. I've known for a while that Caroline is moving against me. I'm not stupid, Julian. I see it all. The votes, the whispers, the way she smiles at me." A pause. "I let it happen. Most of it. I've been letting it happen for months." She finally turned and looked at me, and her eyes were wet and terrible. "Do you want to know why I haven't stopped my own cousin from trying to take everything I built?
Do you want to know why I've been so tired I could barely stand, and I still get up every morning and go rule an empire I've already decided to lose?"
"Ellie," I said softly, "you don't have to." "I'm dying, Julian." She said it. She finally said it, to me, out loud, in the dark of the car. The thing she had knelt in a temple over. The thing she had frozen me out for 3 years to keep me from ever having to hear. "I have a bad heart. It's a family thing. It killed my mother and my grandmother, and it's killing me, and there's nothing anyone can do. And I have maybe 8 months, and I've known for over a year, and I never told you because—" Her voice broke completely. "Because I watched my mother die when I was 6, and I watched what it did to everyone who loved her. And I swore I would never do that to anyone. And then they made me marry you. And you were so kind. And I could see you were going to love me. And I couldn't let you love a dead woman. So I made you hate me. I made myself into ice, so that when I'm gone, you'll be free. So you'll grieve for a week, and then go find someone warm, and forget I ever... And it was the only way I knew how to." She was crying, my wife, the Ice Queen, sobbing openly in the dark of the car. 3 years of it coming apart all at once. And I did the only thing there was to do. The thing I had wanted to do for 2 months and had not been allowed to. I pulled her into my arms, and she came. She came without resisting for the first time in 3 years. And she pressed her face into my chest, and she cried like the 6-year-old at the hospital bed. And I held her together with both arms, and I said, into her hair, "I know." She went still. "I know, Ellie," I said again, and my own voice was not steady. "I've known for 2 months. I followed you to the temple. I heard you. I heard every word you prayed for me." I felt her whole body go rigid with shock in my arms. "I know you're dying. I know Caroline is the one killing you faster. I know about your doctor and your medicine and all of it. And I have known for 2 months. And I never signed the divorce papers. I tore them up the same day. And I've spent every day since making very, very certain that you are not going to die." I pulled back just enough to look into her stunned, wet, disbelieving eyes. "Because I lied to you about who I am, Ellie. I've been lying to you for 3 years.
And it is time you knew the truth. All of it. And I need you to listen, because everything, your life, depends on you understanding what I'm about to tell you. I told her everything that night, in the dark of the car, and then in the lamplight of the penthouse living room where we sat until dawn. I told her the name I was born with. Julian Thorne. I watched her face when I said it. Watched the name land. Because even the Ashfords, even a titan like Eleanor, knew that name the way ordinary people know the names of mountains. A thing so large and so distant, it did not quite seem to belong to the same world as a man who made her congee. Thorne Global. The empire behind the empires. The capital that moved nations. "You're," she said, and stopped, because it did not fit. None of it fit. The leech and the mountain could not be the same man. And yet she was looking at his face, and she could no longer pretend she had not always sensed something underneath. "You're a Thorne. The Thorne. The heir. All this time, you've been washing my dishes." I walked away from it, I said. All of it. Years ago. I was tired of being what that name made me. I took a different name, Reed. And when our families arranged this marriage, I thought, here is my chance to be an ordinary man, with an ordinary, quiet wife. And no one will ever know. And I can just live. I looked at her. And then the ordinary, quiet wife turned out to be you. And I fell in love with the coldest woman in the capital. And I spent 3 years thinking she despised me. And I never once suspected the truth, because I was too busy hiding my own to see yours. And then I told her the harder thing. The thing that mattered more than the empire, because the empire could not save her, but this could. I told her about the spear's hand. I told her, quietly, without drama, what I had been before I put the scalpel down, the surgeon they carried the doomed to in the dark, the hands that pulled the dead back across the river. I told her about the operating rooms and the impossible cases and the name. Whispered on 2 continents. And I watched her understand, slowly, what it meant. And I watched the understanding collide with the memory of a man kneeling over her on the bathroom floor and doing something no house husband could ever have done. "That's how you knew," she breathed. "On the floor. When my heart. You knew exactly. Because you've done it 1,000 times. 10,000, I said. And Ellie, listen to me now, because this is the only part that matters. I took both her hands in mine, and I made her look at me. The disease that's killing you is not untreatable. Your doctor lied to you. Caroline paid him to lie to you. There is a compound that halts it, and there is a procedure that reverses it, and both of them came out of Thorne's laboratories, my laboratories. And the compound is already in your blood. It has been for 2 months. It's in the medicine I've been folding into your food and swapping into your bottles every night while you slept. That's why your heart is stronger. That's why you look well. That's why Arthur's coup failed, and the board saw a winner instead of an invalid. I have been healing you for 2 months, Ellie, and you never knew, and it's working, and it is only the beginning. My voice dropped. The procedure that finishes it. The surgery that gives you not 8 more months, but 14 more years. There are 3 surgeons on Earth who can perform it without killing you on the table. And you married the best of them. She stared at me. And then, because she was Eleanor Vance, because 25 years of ice do not melt in a single night, no matter what the heart underneath is doing, she pulled her hands out of mine, and she stood up, and she wrapped her arms around herself, and she did the thing I had known, dreaded she would do. She tried to push me away one last time. "No," she said. "No. You have to leave, Julian. Now that I know what you are, now that I know you can. No. This is the exact thing I spent 3 years preventing. Do you understand? If you do this, if you throw all of Thorne against my family, if you cut yourself open trying to save me and I die on your table anyway, if you let yourself love me all the way, and then my heart does what Ashford hearts always do, it will destroy you. And I would rather die of this disease in 8 months, having kept you safe, than survive 1 more year, knowing I broke you, the way my mother broke everyone who loved her." She was crying again, and shaking, and backing away from me across the room. "Please, if you love me,
And God help me, I finally believe that you do. Then that's exactly why you have to go. Take your medicine, and your surgery, and your empire, and go. And let me do the one good thing I've been trying to do since the day I met you. Let me die without taking you down with me. And I stood up, and I crossed the room to her, and I did not let her back away. And I took her face in both my hands, gently, and I said the thing I had been carrying for 2 months, the thing that was the whole truth of me. Ellie.
Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once, and then I never want to argue about it again. I held her wet, terrified, compliant gaze. You have spent your entire life believing that the most loving thing you can do for a person is to leave them before you can hurt them. Your mother taught you that, dying, when you were 6 years old and too small to know she was wrong. And I need you to hear me when I tell you that she was wrong. Leaving isn't love. Leaving is just fear wearing love's coat. The most loving thing, the hardest thing, the only real thing, is to stay. To stay and be hurt and stay anyway. To love someone all the way, knowing it might destroy you, and to decide that they are worth being destroyed for, and to stay. My thumbs wiped the tears off her cheeks. You wanted to protect me by leaving. I am going to protect you by staying, and by fighting, and by fixing your heart with my own 2 hands. And if it destroys me, then it destroys me, and that is my choice to make, not yours, because that is what it actually means to love someone, Eleanor. It means you don't get to make their sacrifices for them. So no, I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving. You are going to live, and you are going to have to live with the fact that someone loved you enough to refuse to let you die alone. And I know that's the most frightening thing in the world to you, and I don't care, because I am done letting your fear make your choices, and I am done letting a 6-year-old girl at a hospital bed run the life of the woman I love. She broke. Completely. Finally. Entirely. She sagged forward against me, and I caught her, and she wrapped her arms around me, and held on as if I were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. And she cried, and I cried too, both of us, in the gray light before dawn. And when she could finally speak again, she said, into my chest, in a voice with no ice left in it at all, "I'm so scared, Julian. I'm so tired of being scared. I've been scared my whole life." "I know," I said. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. That's the whole point. That was always the whole point." And Eleanor Vance, the ice queen of the capital, the woman who had spent 3 years and 25 years before that making absolutely certain that no one would ever be allowed to love her, stopped fighting, at last, and let herself be loved. She let me hold her until the sun came up. And somewhere in that long dawn, without either of us saying it, the thing that had been frozen for a quarter century finished melting. And what was left underneath was not weakness at all. It was the bravest thing I have ever seen. It was a terrified person choosing, for the first time, to stay. But love does not stop a heart from being sick, and forgiveness does not stop a cousin from being a murderer. When the sun was fully up, and Eleanor had finally fallen asleep against me, exhausted, her breathing deep and even, and, I noted with the surgeon's part of me that never sleeps, stronger than it had been in a year, I sat there holding her, and I turned the cold, clear part of my mind back to the work that was not yet finished. Because everything I had told her had a shadow side, and the shadow side was this. I had healed her enough that the whole board could see it. Caroline had failed to poison her back into decline, and had watched her own public trap turn the queen into a beloved wife in front of 400 witnesses.
Caroline Vance was, at this moment, a cornered predator who had lost her raider, lost her coup, lost her instruments without knowing she'd lost them, and was staring at a queen who was supposed to be dying and was instead growing stronger and more untouchable by the day, protected by a titan Caroline could not name. And cornered predators do not surrender. They make one last, reckless, desperate lunge for the throat. I had 2 months of intelligence telling me exactly what kind of person Caroline was. And I knew, with the certainty of a man who has spent his life reading how the desperate behave, that she was not going to try to remove Eleanor slowly anymore. She had run out of slow. She was going to try to kill my wife directly, soon, and violently, and disguise it as the tragic, sudden failure of a doomed heart, before the mystery protector could finish whatever he was doing. And she was going to do it at the one place where Eleanor would be exposed, surrounded by family, off her guard. The reading of the will. Eleanor, believing herself dying, had scheduled weeks ago a private family gathering to formally review the Ashford succession and estate.
at the old family estate outside the city, this coming weekend. Every vulture in one house, the queen at her supposed weakest, a remote location, and a family full of people with reasons to want her gone. If I were Caroline, that is where I would do it. Which meant, that is where I was going to be waiting. I looked down at my sleeping wife, at her strong, even breathing, at the color in her face, and I made her a silent third promise, the last one. I am going to let them reach for you one final time. And when they do, in front of your whole family, I'm going to stop being the leech forever. And I'm going to show every single one of them exactly who has been standing behind you this whole time. And after that, my love, no one is ever going to be able to hurt you again. The Ashford estate stood an hour outside the capital, an old grey pile of stone and ivy behind iron gates, the kind of house that has watched a family kill itself over money for 100 years. On Saturday, every one of them came. Arthur, heavy and sullen, still nursing his gala humiliation. Caroline, radiant and warm and deadly, playing the devoted cousin, kissing Eleanor's cheek at the door with lips that had ordered her death. Cousins, aunts, the whole circling flock, gathered for what they all believed was the beginning of the end. The dying queen putting her affairs in order, the estate at last coming into play.
And Ruby was there too, in her role as the chairwoman's assistant. Quiet and efficient, and as far as Caroline knew, still loyally managing the husband. Only Ruby and Dr. Finch, who arrived that afternoon in his professional capacity to attend the ailing chairwoman, knew that the ground had shifted, and they said nothing, because they belonged to me now, and they were more afraid of me than of Caroline, and rightly so. I came as the husband, the leech. I wore a plain suit, and I stayed a step behind my wife, and I let them all look through me, the way they had looked through me for 3 years. And I watched Caroline watch Eleanor, and I saw, under the warmth, the cold calculation, and I knew it was going to be tonight. Jasper and a very quiet, very capable team of Thorn people were already positioned around that estate in ways none of the Ashfords would ever detect. Eleanor knew the shape of what was coming, I had told her, and she was frightened, but she trusted me now, and she played her part, the tired, dying queen, magnificently. And we waited for Caroline to reach for the throat. She reached for it at dinner. It was elegant, I will give her that. Elegant and evil, and exactly what I had expected. During the long formal dinner, Caroline, all solicitude, insisted on personally seeing to her dear cousin's care, on bringing Eleanor her evening medication herself, on pouring her wine, on playing the devoted family nurse in front of everyone, so that later, when the tragedy came, a dozen witnesses would remember only how lovingly Caroline had tended to poor dying Eleanor in her final hours. And in the wine, or the water, or the pills she pressed so tenderly into Eleanor's hand, went the thing designed to stop an already weakened heart and make it look like nothing but the sad, expected, natural end of a doomed woman. Except Eleanor's heart was not weakened anymore, and Eleanor did not drink the wine, or the water, or take the pills, because I had told her not to. And every glass and every tablet Caroline handed her that night went, by careful sleight of hand my wife had practiced all week, untouched, into a napkin, into a pocket, into the waiting hands of Jasper's people, who bagged and sealed each one as evidence.
Caroline spent the entire dinner administering a murder to a woman who was quietly collecting every dose of it as a court exhibit. But Caroline was patient and thorough, and she was watching. And midway through the evening, she began to realize that her cousin was not fading. She had dosed Eleanor enough by now to drop a knox, and Eleanor was sitting there bright-eyed and steady. And I watched the confusion flicker across Caroline's beautiful face, then the alarm, then the first cold edge of panic, and I knew she was about to do something less subtle. So I decided the time had come. I had let them reach for my wife's throat one final time, and I had it all, the wine, the water, the pills, sealed and sourced, and I did not need to let it go 1 second further and risk Caroline doing something truly reckless with a knife or a stairwell. It was time. I stood up. I did it quietly. I set down my napkin, and I stood up at that long table full of Ashfords, the leech, the nobody, rising to his feet uninvited among his betters, and the whole table turned to look at me with that reflexive contempt. And Arthur actually said, "Sit down, boy, the adults are talking." And I looked at him,
And then I looked slowly around that entire table of vultures, and I let them see, for the first time in 3 years, what was actually underneath the man they had spent 3 years despising. And whatever they saw in my face, the temperature of the room changed. The contempt faltered. Because the thing looking back at them out of the leech's eyes was not a leech at all. "My name," I said into the silence, unhurried, "is not Julian Reed." I let that sit. My name is Julian Thorne. And I watched the name detonate around the table, watched the faces of the aunts and the cousins go slack, watched Arthur's heavy jaw come loose, because they knew the name. Everyone with money knew the name, and it did not compute, could not compute, the leech and the mountain, and I kept going before they could recover. Sole heir of Thorne Global, the entity that has spent the last 2 months walling off your takeover, breaking Adrian Shaw, defending the chairwoman's leadership, and defending it, for those slow to arrive at it, because the chairwoman is my wife, and I've been sitting at your tables and washing her dishes and letting every one of you look through me for 3 years, and I've been watching all of you the entire time. My gaze came to rest, finally, on Carolyn, who had gone the color of the tablecloth. Every one of you. And that was the moment Eleanor's heart, which had been holding up so bravely under the strain of the evening and the fear and everything else, chose to stumble. I want to be honest, because this is the part that could have gone wrong. The part where all my planning met the raw fact of a sick heart under stress. Whether it was the tension of the reveal or simply the unpredictable way a healing heart destabilizes, Eleanor made a small sound beside me, and her hand went to her chest, and her face strained white, and she swayed in her chair, and the whole table erupted, and Caroline, quick as a snake even in her shock, cried out, "She's having an episode! Someone help her, doctor! Do something!" Already spinning it, already narrating the tragic natural death for the witnesses, because if the Queen died right now in front of everyone, it would look like exactly what Caroline had spent 14 months building it to look like. But I was already moving. I caught Eleanor as she slid from the chair, and I lowered her to the floor, and the leech husband was gone, entirely and forever. And what knelt over the chairwoman of Ashford Group on the dining room floor of that old grey house was the Reaper's hand. And every soul in that room fell silent, because they had never in their lives seen anyone move the way I moved then. I read her in a heartbeat, throat, wrist, pupils, the exact character of the arrhythmia, and I called out, without looking up, in a voice of absolute command that froze the entire room. "Finch, my bag, now!" And Dr. Alistair Finch, who I had ordered to come prepared, was there in an instant with the case I had given him, and I opened it and drew up, with hands that did not shake, that never shook, the precise compound in the precise dose that a lifetime of these hands and the file of my wife's exact condition told me would catch her heart and hold it. "Stay with me, Ellie," I said, low, only for her, as I worked. "I've got you. I've got you. You are not dying on this floor in front of these people. Look at my eyes. Breathe. That's it. Trust me. Stay." And I felt it, under my hands, under the needle. The same thing I had felt on the bathroom floor 2 months before. The exact moment her stumbling heart caught the rhythm I gave it and steadied, and her color began to crawl back, and her wild, frightened eyes found mine and held, and she breathed, and she lived. The whole room had watched it, the whole family. They had watched the leech become a legend in the space of 90 seconds, watched him pull the dying queen back from the edge with a skill that no amount of money can buy, and only one kind of man on earth possesses. And they understood, all of them, in that silence, that everything they thought they knew had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, for 3 years. I looked up from my wife, still cradling her against me on the floor, and I looked at Caroline Vance. And Caroline Vance looked back at me with the face of a woman who has just watched her entire world end, and has not yet found the bottom of how far she is going to fall. Because she understood. She had spent 14 months quietly murdering a woman, and it turned out that woman's leech of a husband was the Thorne heir and the greatest surgeon alive. And he had known. He had clearly known for a long time, and he had been watching her the whole time, and every single thing she had done was about to come out. "Now," I said very quietly to the silent room, my arm still around my breathing, living wife, "let's talk about how my wife came to be dying in the first place. And let's talk about who, exactly has been feeding her poison? I've prepared a presentation. I nodded, and the doors of the dining room opened, and Jasper came in, carrying a tablet and a case of sealed, bagged evidence. And behind him came two people the family did not expect to see standing on my side of the room. Dr. Alistair Finch, grey and trembling and ready to confess, and Ruby, pale and silent, and holding the recordings that would bury the woman who had planted her. "It's quite thorough," I said, and I looked at Caroline, and I smiled, for the first time all evening, and it was not a kind smile.
You're all going to want to see this. What followed, in that old stone dining room, was the most thorough dismantling of a human being I have ever conducted, and I have conducted a few. I laid Caroline Vance open the way I once laid open the impossible cases, precisely, patiently, leaving nothing. I had Eleanor move to a chaise at the side of the room, wrapped warm, stable now, and she watched all of it with her hand in mine when I was not using it, and I began. Jasper put the presentation up on the wall of that ancient dining room, and I walked the entire family, one exhibit at a time, through 14 months of murder. I showed them the money first, because money is the language that family spoke. The offshore shell, the cousin's account, the paper foundation, the small steady river of payments from Caroline Vance to Dr. Alistair Finch, dates and amounts, matched line by line against the dates on which Finch had adjusted Eleanor's protocol. I showed them the medical file, the disease that was real and terminal and cruel. And then I showed them the treatment that existed and worked. And then I showed them the precise correlation between Caroline's payments and the acceleration of a decline that should never have accelerated. Your cousin, I said to the room, was not letting Eleanor die. Anyone can fail to save a dying woman. Caroline was paying a doctor to help her die faster and to keep her hopeless while she did it, so that the chair would pass cleanly to Caroline on schedule in 8 to 10 months with no suspicion. This is not neglect. This is murder, conducted slowly over more than a year against a woman who trusted her with everything. Then I turned to Dr. Alistair Finch, and I said, "Doctor, tell them." And Finch, grey, broken, a dead man reading his own eulogy, confessed. Everything. In front of the whole family, on the record, he laid out how Caroline had come to him, how much she had paid, exactly what she had ordered him to do, month by month, the false prognoses, the placebo protocols, the specific lie that no treatment existed. And when he had finished emptying himself out, the family was staring at Caroline with faces of pure horror. And Caroline was on her feet, with her back against the wall, and she opened her mouth to deny it, and I gave her no room. "Before you speak," I said, "let me show the room tonight." And Jasper laid out on the long dinner table the sealed, bagged evidence from that very evening, glass by glass, pill by pill. Every dose Caroline had so lovingly administered to her dear dying cousin over dinner, each one collected untouched, each one sourced and sealed. Every glass she handed my wife tonight, every pill she pressed into her hand. My wife drank none of it. She's been palming all of it into evidence bags for the last 3 hours while your cousin poured her murder into a napkin. I looked at Caroline. The lab will confirm what I already know. This isn't the slow compound anymore. You ran out of patience when Eleanor started getting well, and you switched to something designed to stop a heart in a single night and look natural doing it. You came here to kill her this weekend, in front of the whole family, and blame it on a broken heart. You almost pulled it off. You would have pulled it off against any husband on earth but this one. And finally, the last exhibit, the one that took Caroline's legs out from under her entirely. Ruby stepped forward, pale and silent, and she handed me the recordings, 2 years of them, and I did not even have to play them all. I played 30 seconds. Caroline's own voice, unmistakable, giving Ruby her orders. Manage the husband, keep the leech lonely, get him out the door before she dies so there's no spouse to inherit or investigate. And I watched the last of the colour leave Caroline Vance's face as she heard her own voice condemn her, and I watched her understand that Ruby, her own planted cousin, her own instrument, had been mine for weeks, that the doctor was mine, that everything she had built her murder on had been quietly, invisibly turned against her, that she had been standing inside a closing trap for a month and had smiled and poured wine and never once felt the walls. She broke the way they all break. First denial, shrill and desperate. It's fabricated. It's thorn money buying lies. None of it is real. Then, as the family's faces made clear that no one believed her, that Finch's confession and her own recorded voice and the sealed poison on the table had ended her, she turned to rage. And then, at the very end, when she saw Arthur Vance physically move his chair away from her, as if she were contagious, when she saw that even her fellow vultures had abandoned her the instant she became worthless to them, she collapsed. She sank down against the wall of the family's ancient dining room, and she began to beg. And it was, I will not pretend otherwise, a satisfying thing to watch. The careful, patient predator, who had smiled at me across 3 years of galas, reduced to weeping on the floor. "Eleanor!" she sobbed, crawling toward the chaise where my wife lay watching her with an expression I had never seen on Eleanor's face before. Not ice, not rage, something worse for Caroline, a vast, cold grief.
"Ellie, please. We grew up together. You're my family. I never. It wasn't. Please, I'll do anything. Don't let him. Please." And Eleanor Vance looked down at the cousin who had spent 14 months murdering her, and she said, very quietly, in a voice with no ice in it, and no mercy either, "You held my hand at my mother's funeral. I was 6. You were 8. You held my hand, and you told me I wasn't alone." She let that sit in the terrible silence. "I believed you for 25 years. Get her out of my sight." That was the end of Caroline Vance. Jasper's people, who were in fact working in careful coordination with authorities Thorne had quietly briefed, took her that night. The evidence was overwhelming and unimpeachable. The money trail, the doctor's confession, the sealed poison, the recordings. And it did not stay a family matter for long. Attempted murder, conspiracy, corporate fraud, the bribery of a physician, the charges stacked up like cordwood. And no amount of Ashford name could hold back a case that Thorne Resources had assembled with surgical thoroughness. Caroline Vance went from the vice chair of a titan to a defendant in an orange jumpsuit, and the trial was a public spectacle. And the woman who had planned to inherit an empire inherited a cell instead. And she spent the rest of her long sentence knowing that she had lost not to the queen she despised, but to the leech she had never once bothered to fear. Arthur Vance. I did not have to destroy. The estate did it for me. When the full picture came out, when it emerged that Arthur had spent months trying to unseat a chairwoman on grounds of failing health, while the failing health was in fact a murder in progress that his own maneuvering had been providing cover for, the board and the shareholders and the family turned on him with the speed of people desperate to prove they had never been on his side. He had not known Caroline was poisoning Eleanor, that much was true. But he had smelled weakness, and he had spent months feasting on it. And no one wanted a patriarch who circled a sick queen like that. He was voted off the board he had ruled for 30 years, stripped of his seat and his committees and his standing in a single meeting, and he retired in disgrace to a quiet estate where the phone did not ring anymore. And the last I heard of Arthur Vance, he was a small, bitter old man that the family had unanimously agreed to forget. For a vain man, it was the cruelest possible ending, and I confess I did not lose any sleep over it.
Adrian Shaw was already gone, broken and fled months before, never to return. And he never learned the name of the man who had ruined him, which I always thought was a fitting punishment for a man who had tried to make a fortune off a murder. Dr. Alistair Finch, whose confession had helped bury Caroline, did not escape either, though his obedience earned him the small mercy of a plea rather than the maximum. He lost his license, his practice, his name, his whole golden life. And he served his time. And when he came out, he was nobody. And he lived the rest of his years as nobody. And he understood every day of it exactly why. I had promised him only that I would not have him destroyed if he obeyed. And I kept that promise precisely. I did not destroy him. I simply let the truth do it. And the truth was thorough. And Ruby. Ruby is the one people always ask about, because she was the cruelest of them in a way. The sad, kind eyes. The birthday cake. 2 years of counterfeit friendship. Ruby had helped me at the end, had handed over the recordings, had stood on my side of the room, and because of that, I kept my word to her too. I did not hand her to a prosecutor.
But I did not save her either. She was finished in the capital, finished in the industry, exposed to everyone who mattered as exactly what she was, and she left, quietly, and disappeared into some other city to be some other person. And I never saw her again, and I never wanted to. The last thing I ever said to her was on the night of the estate, as she left. She stopped in front of me, and she looked at me with those sad eyes one final time, and she said, "The birthday cake was real, you know. That part I actually meant." And I looked at her, and I said, "I know. That's the saddest thing about you, Ruby. Some of it was real, and you did it anyway." And she flinched, and she left, and that was the end of her. The vultures were gone, every one of them. In the space of a single weekend, the entire elegant machine that had spent 14 months feeding on the slow murder of my wife had been taken completely apart, and the pieces scattered, and the people who built it ruined or imprisoned or forgotten. And it had all been done, from the first swapped pill to the last sealed evidence bag, by the man they had spent 3 years calling the leech.
But none of that. Not one bit of it. Not the ruin of Caroline, or the fall of Arthur, or the flight of Ward, was the thing that mattered. All of that was just the clearing of the ground. Because the vultures being gone did not save Eleanor. Her heart was still sick. Stronger, held, healing, but still sick. Still carrying the family curse that had killed her mother and her grandmother. And no amount of ruined enemies would ever change that. There was only one thing left that could. And it was not money. And it was not vengeance. And it was not the law. It was a table, and a blade, and 2 hands. And it was time for the Reaper's hand to do the one thing he had come out of retirement to do. I want to slow down here, in the space between the reckoning and the table, because there was a night in that gap that mattered more than all the ruin of all the vultures, and if I rushed past it, I would be telling you a story about revenge, and this was never a story about revenge. The night after the estate, after Caroline had been taken, and the family had scattered, and the machinery of the law had begun to grind, Eleanor and I sat alone in the penthouse, and she was very quiet. And I let her be quiet. And after a long time she said,
"I keep waiting to feel triumphant. Everyone who hurt me is destroyed. The woman who was murdering me is in a cell. My uncle is finished. I should feel like I won."
She turned her cup slowly on the counter.
"I just feel tired and sad. I feel like I lost my whole family in one weekend, even the parts of it that were poison. Especially those parts. Because I loved them once, Julian. I loved Caroline. She held my hand at my mother's funeral. And now I know that even that was, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe when she was 8 she meant it, and it curdled later. And I'll never know which. And that not knowing is going to sit in me forever."
I did not tell her to feel triumphant. I did not tell her the vultures deserved it, though they did. I understood, better than most, the specific grief of winning. The way a victory over people you once loved leaves a wound that a victory over strangers never does.
"You're allowed to grieve them," I said. "You're allowed to grieve the people they used to be, or the people you thought they were. That's not weakness, Ellie. That's just the cost of having loved them in the first place. And you don't get to skip it just because they turned out to be worth grieving less than you thought. Feel all of it. I'm not going anywhere while you do." She leaned into me, and we sat like that a long time. And then she said something that told me how far she had come. "I don't want to become like them," she said quietly. "I spent so many years being cold because I thought coldness was safe. And now I've seen where cold really goes, all the way down. I've seen Caroline, and I don't. I don't want to win by becoming the thing that almost killed me. Promise me. If I ever start to go cold like that again, the real cold, the poison kind, promise me you'll—" She stopped. "You won't," I said. "You already know the difference. The old you would have felt triumphant tonight. This you feels grief. That grief is the proof that you didn't become them. The day you can destroy someone who hurt you and feel nothing at all, that's the day to worry. But you'll never have that day, Ellie, because you feel too much. You always did. That's what the ice was for. It was never that you felt nothing. It was that you felt everything, and it terrified you. And I would rather have a wife who grieves her enemies than one who doesn't feel anything at all. So no, I won't promise to save you from going cold. I'll promise something better. I'll promise to be here, warm, every single day, so that you never have a reason to go cold again in the first place." She cried a little then, but it was a different kind of crying than any I had seen from her before. Not the hidden, desperate crying of a woman keeping a secret. Not the broken dam of the car. Just the ordinary, quiet tears of a person setting down a weight they have carried too long. And I held her while she set it down. And when she was done, she wiped her face, and she looked at me and she said, with a watery, exhausted, absolutely genuine smile,
the first genuinely peaceful expression I had ever seen on her face. Okay, fix my heart then. I've decided I want to see what 40 years feels like. With you, over terrible congee. Fix it. I'm going to, I said. It's the only thing I've ever wanted. And there was one more thing that happened in that gap, small and strange, that I have never forgotten.
Jasper came to the penthouse to brief me on the final disposition of the evidence, and when he was done, he lingered, which Jasper never did, and he looked at Eleanor, who was asleep on the couch, and then at me, and he said, in his flat, quiet way, "For 3 years, sir, I thought you had made a mistake. Walking away, burying yourself, playing dead in a cold marriage. I thought we had lost you." He paused. "I was wrong. You didn't bury yourself. You were waiting. You just didn't know what for." And he nodded once and let himself out, and I sat in the lamplight next to my sleeping wife, and I thought about that for a long time. And I decided he was right. I had spent 3 years thinking I had thrown my old life away for nothing, thinking the man I used to be was gone, wasted, retired into a loveless marriage in a cold apartment. And it turned out I had not wasted him at all. It turned out every terrible thing I had ever been, the empire, the scalpel, the wars, the reaper's hand, all of it, the whole blood-soaked crown I had run away from, had been waiting, quietly, for exactly one purpose. To save the one person in the world I would have chosen to save above all others.
I had not thrown my old life away. I had been saving it. For her. For this. And I would have done all of it again. Every war, every cut, every year of it. For the sound of her breathing on that couch. Alive. The procedure could not be rushed, and it could not be done by anyone but me. And both of those facts terrified Eleanor in different ways. We spent 6 weeks preparing. 6 weeks of the real compound, no longer swapped in secret, but taken openly now, at proper dose, under my direct supervision. 6 weeks of rebuilding her strength and stabilizing her heart to the point where it could survive what I was going to do to it. Thorne's own facility, the finest cardiac surgical suite in the hemisphere, a place most of the world did not know existed, was quietly prepared. I assembled a team, the best anesthesiologist alive, the 2 other surgeons on Earth who understood the procedure, brought in not to operate, because I would not let another hand touch her, but to stand by in case my own body failed me in the 12 hours the operation would take. And every day of those 6 weeks, Eleanor grew stronger. And every day, I watched her wrestle with the thing that frightened her more than the surgery. Hope. "What if it doesn't work?" she said to me one night, 6 days before, lying with her head on my chest in the master bedroom, the bedroom I had finally been allowed into, not as a guest, but as her husband. We did not waste those 6 weeks. Whatever years I was fighting to give her, we had already decided we were not going to spend a single day of them being cold to each other ever again. And so those weeks, even in their fear, were the happiest of my life. And I think of hers. "What if you open me up?" she said. "And my heart is worse than the scans show, and I die on your table, with your hands inside my chest. I could survive 25 years of being alone, and then die the one time I finally let someone." She pressed closer. "I'm not afraid of dying, Julian. I made my peace with dying a long time ago. I'm afraid of dying now that I finally have a reason not to." And I held her, and I told her the truth, which is the only thing I ever told her from the night of the temple forward. "I have opened 10,000 chests," I said. "I have held hearts that other surgeons had already declared dead, and I have made them beat again. I did not come out of a life I swore I'd left. I did not spend 3 years pretending to be a house husband. I did not tear up divorce papers and go to war against your whole family to lose you on a table. Your heart is not going to be worse than the scans show, because I have looked at those scans until I have memorized every millimeter of you, and I know exactly what I am going to find, and I know exactly what I am going to do about it. You are going to go to sleep afraid, and you are going to wake up with 40 years in front of you, and the first face you see is going to be mine. And I am going to be tired, and I am going to need a shave, and I am going to be the happiest man who has ever lived. That is what is going to happen. I am telling you as your surgeon, and I am telling you as your husband, and in neither of those roles have I ever lied to you about anything that mattered." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "Say the thing again."
The thing you said at dawn. About staying. The most loving thing isn't leaving, I said softly into her hair. It's staying. And I'm going to stay. Even when you're asleep and can't see me. Especially then. I'll be right there the whole time, Ellie. My hands are going to be the ones holding your life. And there are no hands in the world I trust more with it than mine. And there is no life in the world I want more to hold. On the morning of the operation, she was calm. I had expected her to be calm, because at the very end, when there is nothing left to do but go, my wife was always brave. That was the truth under all the ice. She was the bravest person I ever knew. They wheeled her in, and I walked beside the gurney holding her hand until the last possible moment. And at the doors of the suite, she looked up at me. And she was not the Ice Queen, and she was not a dying woman. She was just Ellie, my Ellie. And she said, "If something goes wrong, if this is the last time, I need you to know that the 3 years I spent freezing you out were the worst thing I ever did. And the 2 months you spent thawing me were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I love you, Julian Thorne. I love you so much, it terrifies me. And I should have said it 1,000 mornings ago over kanji. And I'm saying it now." "I know," I said, and I kissed her forehead. "You're going to say it 1,000 more mornings. Now go to sleep. I have work to do." And I let go of her hand, and I scrubbed in, and I became, for the last and most important time in my life, the Reaper's hand. I will not tell you the medicine of it, because the medicine of it belongs to a language only 3 people alive speak. I will only tell you that it took 11 hours and 40 minutes, and that it was the hardest thing those hands have ever done. Harder than any war, any impossible case, any legend. Because on every other table in my life, the stakes had been a stranger's life, and on this one, the stakes were the only thing I had ever truly wanted. There is a thing that happens to a surgeon when the patient is someone he loves.
The books say you should never operate on your own, that the emotion makes the hands unsteady, that it clouds the judgment. And it is true, for ordinary surgeons, and it is why other men would have had to hand her to someone else. But I was not an ordinary surgeon, and I had spent 3 years and 2 months and every ounce of who I was learning how to hold absolute love and absolute stillness, in the same body at the same time. And when I stood over my wife's open chest with her sick heart in my hands, I was not shaking. I was the calmest I have ever been in my life. Because there was nowhere else in the universe I would rather have been, and no work I was more certain of. And I looked down at the failing muscle that had been quietly killing her since before she was born. The curse that took her mother and her grandmother, and I thought, not you, not her, not this time. And I fixed it. I fixed it. I repaired what had been declared unrepairable. I replaced what had to be replaced. I did the delicate, impossible thing at the center of it that only these hands could do. And when it was done, when I closed her, when I stepped back and stripped off the gloves after nearly 12 hours on my feet, her heart was beating in a rhythm strong and steady and clean. The rhythm of a woman who was going to live to be old. The rhythm of 40 years. And I stood there in that suite, swaying with exhaustion, and I put my hand over my own mouth, and I wept. Silently, the way she used to weep so no one would hear. Except I was weeping, because the thing I had been fighting for since a candle guttered in a temple on the edge of the city had at last come true. She was going to live. She woke up 9 hours later. I was there, of course. I had not left the room. I was tired, and I needed a shave, exactly as I'd promised her. And I was holding her hand. And when her eyes fluttered open and found me, unfocused at first, and then slowly sharpening, I watched her remember where she was and what had happened. And I watched her realize that she had woken up, that there was an after, that the last time had not been the last time. And I watched my magnificent, brave, no longer dying wife's eyes fill with tears. "You're here," she whispered, her voice a thread. "I told you I'd be here," I said, "the whole time, even when you were asleep, especially then." I lifted her hand and pressed it to my lips. "How do you feel?" She was quiet,
taking inventory of a body that was, for the first time in 14 months, not in the process of dying. And then something crossed her face that I had never once seen there in 3 years. Something I had not been sure she was even capable of. A slow, dawning, disbelieving wonder. And she said, in a small, cracked voice, "My chest doesn't hurt. Not the surgery. That hurts. But the other thing. The thing that's always there. The weight. It's..." She stopped, and the tears spilled over. "It's gone. Julian."
It's gone. I've had it so long I forgot what it was like without it, and I feel alive, I said. Otiv, she breathed, like a word in a language she was learning. I feel alive. And Eleanor Vance, who had spent 25 years certain she was going to die young and alone, who had built a whole frozen kingdom around that certainty, who had knelt in a temple and begged a god she did not believe in to let a fool husband forget her, lay in that bed with her repaired heart beating strong and steady in her chest, and looked at the man who had refused, absolutely refused, to let her die alone. And for the first time in her entire life, she let herself believe in a future. I held her hand while she cried, and I did not tell her to stop, and I did not wipe the tears away too fast, because some tears a person has been holding for 25 years, and they have earned every single one of them. And the only right thing to do is to stay and let them fall, and be there when they finish. She recovered the way she did everything, fiercely, ahead of schedule, refusing to be told what her own body could and couldn't do, until I reminded her that I was, technically, the leading authority on her exact heart in the entire world. And she scowled at me and said, "Fine, but only because you built it." And I laughed for what felt like the first time in years. She was, once she decided to live, absolutely relentless about living, and it was the most beautiful thing I have ever watched. The recovery weeks were a strange, sweet, upside-down honeymoon. The two of us in a quiet thorn estate by the sea while her chest healed, learning, at 31 and 32, how to simply be two people who loved each other, a thing neither of us had ever properly done. I made her breakfast, as I always had, except now she sat across from me and stole food off my plate, and complained about my coffee, and told me, at last, the 1,000 small things a person tells you when they have stopped believing every word might be their last. She told me about her mother. She told me about the 6-year-old at the hospital bed, and the promise that had frozen her whole life. She told me about the wedding night, and how she had stood behind that master bedroom door after she closed it in my face, and pressed her back against it, and slid to the floor and cried, because she had already, on the very first night, been able to tell that I was going to be worth loving, and she had already decided she could never let herself. 3 years of that. She told me all of it, and I told her all of mine, the empire, and the scalpel, and the wars, and the exhaustion that had made me run away into an ordinary man's life. And by the end of those weeks, there was nothing left between us that was hidden. No ice, no borrowed names, no secrets. And I understood that the surgery had healed 2 hearts, not 1. The truth about the mystery titan came out, eventually, because it had to. When Eleanor returned to Ashford Group, whole and strong and visibly, undeniably well, the board and the shareholders and the whole capital had questions. And the biggest question was still the one that had haunted them for months. Who was the anonymous entity that had walled off Adrian Shaw, broken him, defended the chairwoman, planted a public flag behind her leadership? And Eleanor, when she took her seat at the head of that long glass table again, answered it herself. And I would have paid a fortune to see the room, though she told me about it that night in such detail that I almost feel I did. She let them ask. She let the speculation build. And then she said, in that quiet blade of a voice, "You've all spent a great deal of energy trying to identify the party that has been protecting this company. I'll save you the trouble." And she gestured, and the doors opened, and I walked in. The leech, the husband, the nobody they had all looked through for 3 years, in a suit that no longer bothered to hide what it was. And I came and I stood beside my wife's chair at the head of the board of Ashford Group. And Eleanor said, "May I introduce Julian Thorne, sole heir of Thorne Global. The entity that has been protecting this company is my husband, and it has always been my husband. And every one of you who spent 3 years treating him as beneath your notice,
may spend tonight reflecting on the quality of your judgment. She let that land on the pale, stunned, recalculating faces. He will not be joining this board. He has no interest in your company.
He was only ever interested in me. And she looked up at me, and in front of all of them, the Ice Queen of the capital took my hand. The whole balance of the capital's power shifted that day, quietly, the way real power always shifts. It became known, in the careful, whispered way these things become known, that Eleanor Vance was married to the Thorn heir, that the two houses were, in effect, one, and that anyone who had ever thought of Ashford Group as a wounded lion worth circling had better think again, because the wounded lion had, it turned out, been standing next to a dragon the entire time. The board that had feared her before now feared her absolutely. The rivals who had circled fled, and Eleanor, healthy and unassailable, and no longer running an empire she believed she was about to lose, did something I do not think anyone expected. She began to change it. She had spent her whole life believing she had no future, and a person with no future does not build, they only defend. Now she had 40 years, and she poured them into the company, with a vision she had never let herself imagine before. And the Ashford Group, under a living Eleanor, became something greater than it had ever been under a dying one. And she folded into it, quietly, the one part of my old life I found I could not entirely leave behind, because the disease that had nearly killed her had killed her mother and her grandmother, and it was going to keep killing Ashford daughters and other people's daughters for as long as it existed. And I was one of a handful of people alive who could do anything about it. So together, we built something. A cardiac research institute, Thorn Medicine and Ashford Resources joined, dedicated to the exact family of diseases that had haunted her bloodline. And I put down the anonymity, and I let the Reaper's hand become something better than a whispered legend in dark operating rooms. I began to teach. I began to give the thing in my hands to other hands, so that the next 6-year-old kneeling by the next hospital bed might not have to make the promise that had frozen my wife's life. Eleanor came to the institute's opening, and she cut the ribbon, and she stood in front of the cameras, healthy and radiant, the woman who was supposed to be dead. And she told the world, plainly, that she was alive because someone had refused to let her die alone, and that no one should ever have to face the dark by themselves. And I stood at the back of the room and watched my once frozen wife become, of all things, a person who talked about hope in public, and I thought my heart would burst. We had a second wedding, her idea, not mine, which tells you everything about how far she had come. The first one was a contract between two families, she said. I want one that's just ours. I want to stand up in front of people and say the things I was too much of a coward to say the first time. I want to do it right. And so we did. It was small, which surprised everyone who knew the scale the Ashfords did things at. Small and warm and full only of people who actually mattered. And Eleanor Vance wore white again. But it was nothing like the first time, because the woman who walked toward me down that short aisle was not made of ice. She was made of everything the ice had been hiding all along. And when she reached me, she took both my hands, and she said her vows. And she did not say them the way you recite a contract. She said them the way you confess a truth you almost died without telling. And there was not a dry eye in the room, and mine were the wettest of all. I spent 3 years teaching you to believe I didn't love you, she said, standing in front of everyone, her voice steady and clear and unafraid. Because I was too frightened of what my love would cost you. I was wrong. You taught me that. You taught me that the bravest thing isn't leaving before it hurts. It's staying, all the way, no matter what it costs. You stayed when I was cold. You stayed when I was cruel. You stayed when I was dying, and you stayed when I told you to go, and you stayed with your hands inside my chest, and you gave me back a life I had already given up on. And I am going to spend every one of the 40 years you fought for me telling you, out loud, every single morning, over kanji, the thing I was too afraid to say the first 3 years. I love you. I love you. I'm not afraid to say it anymore. I'm not afraid of anything anymore, because you're here, and you stayed. And I said my vows too, though I hardly remember them, because I was looking at her, at the color in her face, and the life in her eyes, and the strong, steady heart I had held in my own 2 hands, beating in her chest. And all I really remember saying, at the end, was the thing I had said to her on a bathroom floor, and in a dark car, and at a dawn that changed both our lives. I'm not going anywhere. I never was. That was always the whole point. 5 years later, I'm standing on the balcony of a house by the sea. The same quiet coast where my wife's chest once healed. And it is early, and the light is coming up gold over the water. And behind me in the kitchen, I can hear her, awake before me for once, badly, loudly, cheerfully failing to make congee. Because after 5 years, she has decided she wants to learn how to make the thing I have made her 10,000 mornings. And she is terrible at it. Gloriously terrible. And she will not let me help. And every few minutes she calls out an insulting question about the process, and then ignores my answer entirely. Eleanor Vance, the woman the financial papers still call the sharpest capital titan of her generation, cannot cook rice, and it is one of the great joys of my life. Let me tell you what happened to all of them, since I know you want to know. Caroline Vance is still in prison, and she will be for a very long time, and she has never once, in 5 years, expressed a word of remorse, only a cold, enduring hatred for the leech who beat her. And I have made my peace with the fact that some people are simply what they are, and that the kindest thing you can do is put them where they can no longer reach the people you love, and then stop thinking about them. Arthur died 2 years ago, small and bitter and mostly forgotten, in the quiet estate the family exiled him to, and I am told that only a handful of people attended, and that none of them cried, and that is, I think, the truest possible measure of a life spent circling the weak. Adrian Shaw never recovered his empire. Last I heard, he was a mid-level nobody in a distant city, still, to this day, not knowing who ruined him, and I find, more and more, that I never think about him at all. Dr. Finch served his time and lives quietly as no one.
And Ruby, wherever she is some other person now. And I hope, in a distant, abstract way, that the part of her that meant the birthday cake eventually found something real to attach itself to. Because that is the closest I can come to forgiving her. And it is closer than she deserves. But none of them are the story. I only mention them because that is how these stories are supposed to end, with an accounting of the fallen. And they have fallen, thoroughly and permanently. The real story is the sound coming from the kitchen right now. The real story is that my wife is alive. The Institute is thriving. In 5 years, the treatment that saved Eleanor has saved 411 other people. And I have that number memorized, the way I once memorized her scans. And every one of them is a 6-year-old somewhere who will not have to kneel by a hospital bed and learn the wrong lesson about love. And every one of them is, in a way, my wife, saved again. I still operate sometimes, when a case is impossible enough that only these hands will do. But mostly I teach now, and the hands I have taught have gone out into the world and become their own quiet legends. And the name, Reaper's Hand, has slowly turned into something that is not whispered in fear anymore, but spoken in hope. And I find I like that ending for it much better than the one it had before. Eleanor's heart is perfect. I check it myself, obsessively, more often than any reasonable doctor would, and every time it is strong and steady and clean. 40 more years of it, at least, probably more, because the woman takes care of herself now in a way she never did when she believed she was dying. And she has more reason to, because there is a 4th heartbeat in this house now, small and quick, and there has been for 3 years. And she's asleep down the hall as I write this, our daughter, and she has her mother's eyes, and, God help us all, her mother's temperament. And when Eleanor first held her in the hospital, both of us terrified, and both of us weeping, my wife looked down at this tiny, furious person, and then up at me. And she said the thing that I will carry with me until the day I finally do die. Old, in my bed, decades and decades from now, with my wife's hand in mine. She said, "She has the Ashford heart, Julian." And I understood exactly what she meant. That our daughter might carry the same curse, the same disease that took her great-grandmother and her grandmother, and nearly took her mother. And I looked at my wife, and I looked at my daughter, and I said, I know. And if she does, we already have the cure. And I already have the hands. And she is never, ever going to have to face it alone. Because that curse dies with this family, Ellie. We already killed it. It just doesn't know it yet. And Eleanor started to cry. And then she started to laugh. And then she did both at once.
The way people do when a thing they spent their whole life dreading has been turned, against all odds, into a thing they no longer have to fear at all. That is the whole story. That is everything.
I married the coldest woman in the capital, and for 3 years I believed she despised me, and I was ready to leave. And then I followed her to a temple on the edge of the city, and I heard her kneel on cold stone and trade away her own years for the happiness of a husband she was dying to protect. And it turned out that everything I thought was hatred was the deepest and most terrible love I have ever encountered. A love so afraid of causing pain that it disguised itself as ice for 3 years rather than let itself be seen. And I want to tell you the thing I learned, the thing I would carve into stone if I could, the thing that is the entire point of everything that happened to us. When someone pushes you away, look closer. Not always, not for everyone. Some people push you away because they simply do not want you, and you should believe them and go. But sometimes, the coldest person in the room is the one who loves you the most, and is the most afraid of what that love will cost you, and has decided, in some lonely, broken way, that the kindest thing they can do is make you leave before you get hurt. And they are wrong. They are always wrong. Because leaving is not love. Leaving is just fear wearing love's coat. And the only real answer to that kind of fear, the only thing that ever breaks it, is to refuse to go, to stay. To stay when they are cold, and stay when they are cruel, and stay when they tell you to leave, and to love them all the way through the ice, until the ice remembers it was only ever water, and melts. I almost lost her. I want you to understand that, at the end, because it is the thing I think about most, in the good, quiet mornings like this one. I signed the divorce papers. I left them on the counter. If I had not wandered, by pure accident, into a small temple on the edge of the city on the exact right morning, I would have walked away, and she would have died within the year, alone, exactly as she had planned, believing to her last breath that it was the loving thing to do, and I would have gone through the rest of my life never knowing that the coldest woman I ever met had loved me so much she was willing to die to keep me safe. A whole life, both our lives, hung on one accidental morning and one whispered prayer. The queen I almost lost. I say to myself sometimes, in the dark, just to feel the weight of how close it came. And then I reach over, and I feel her heartbeat under my hand, strong and steady and alive. The heart I held in my own 2 hands, and gave back to the world. And the terror passes, and I breathe. "Julian!" Her voice from the kitchen, exasperated and warm and gloriously alive. "Julian, I have destroyed the rice again. Come and look at what I have done. Come and see. Bring the child. She should witness this. Come here. I need you." I need you. 3 years, she could not say a single warm word. Now she cannot stop. And she says the warmest things over ruined rice at dawn, casually, the way ordinary happy people do, not knowing what a miracle it is, or knowing exactly, both at once. "Coming!" I call back, and I take one last look at the gold light on the water, and I go inside, to my alive wife and my sleeping daughter, and my ruined congee, and my ordinary, impossible, hard-won, everyday life. The life I almost gave up on. The life that hung on a candle in a temple, and a fool who wouldn't leave. And I stay. I stay, and I stay, and I stay. Because that was always the whole point. That was always the only point there ever was.